Chapter 902. In the quiet hall, Nalan Shurying slowly stood up. She recorded the latest body data of Dongqing Rushi and Tribulation respectively, planning to leave here and go to her own lab to study. The subtle and imperceptible sword energy space began to separate layer by layer. The black-clothed man silently followed Nalan Shurying into the elevator. The elevator slowly went up 15 meters underground. He entered the password 3 times on the way and finally came to the surface. The elevator opened, and Nalan Shurying walked out and went in another direction. The black-clothed man, who was calm and indifferent, seemed to have no emotions and aura, glanced at Nalan Shurying and slowly walked out of the elevator. Outside the elevator was an incredibly grand hall. The length of thousands of meters was divided into rooms. In the central area, there was a rockery, a fish pond, and a small garden. The huge space and the nearly 20-meter-high dome made the whole hall look magnificent. Standing in it, everyone could feel their own insignificance. It was not a hall, but a small square. The black-clothed man watched quietly. In his sight, the combatants and civil servants of Emperor Dong's palace kept coming in and out, in 2s and 3s, constantly talking about something. There were not many people in Emperor Dong's palace, so this very advanced hall seemed extremely empty. The black-clothed man stood there for a while, then silently moved forward, and walked out of the main entrance of the hall. The main entrance of the hall was a huge fountain square. Thousands of fountains were constantly spraying transparent water columns. The water columns rose tens of meters into the sky and converged in the center. A majestic and awe-inspiring pitch-black greatsword stood in the center of the water column. The greatsword was as tall as the huge castle behind the black-clothed man. Countless splashes of water slowly flowed on the greatsword, sparkling with colorful rays of light under the sunlight. The black-clothed man's mouth twitched. He had almost never seen such a large fountain square. Not to mention in Tiannan, even in Yuzhou, a fountain square of this scale could almost be regarded as a landmark. He narrowed his eyes, smiled self-mockingly, and whispered, "This is really the style of a nouveau riche." His figure directly passed by the fountain square, straight ahead, and stepped on a verdant lawn. There was a group of white pigeons that were not afraid of humans on the lawn. Several young women of Emperor Dong's palace seemed to be feeding the pigeons on the lawn during the break. The white pigeons fluttered their wings and landed on their palms to peck the corn in their palms, causing a burst of crisp and energetic laughter. A large golden retriever lay lazily in the middle of the lawn. Before the man in black could approach, the big dog that was lying lazily in the grass had already straightened its body and was looking straight in the direction of the man in black. The black-clothed man's body suddenly stiffened. He felt awkward and incredulous at the same time. He looked at the golden retriever in front of him, confused. He couldn't understand how the golden retriever had discovered him. The seemingly docile big dog slowly arched its body and let out a low growl, as if it would pounce at any moment. The man in black frowned. The sword chi around him vibrated slightly. The golden retriever's tail suddenly stood up, and its body tensed up to the extreme. "It can't see me, but it can feel the surrounding sword chi?" The man in black frowned. His figure flickered, and he instantly passed by the golden retriever. The golden retriever whimpered and turned around twice. It seemed to be a little confused. It ran around for a while, and it seemed to feel no danger. It whimpered and lazily patted down again. "What the hell is going on?" the man in black muttered to himself. He passed by the lawn and stepped on a wide arch bridge. Under the arch bridge was a clear stream. The circulating water surrounded the entire Emperor Dong's palace. It was a huge artificial lake. The man in black stood at the other end of the bridge and looked back at Emperor Dong's palace. The huge 6-story castle of Emperor Dong's palace was facing the pitch-black giant sword in front of the gate. It was like a giant standing in front of a hill, so tall and majestic, with a large shadow that almost blocked the sun. The man in black glanced at it expressionlessly, then turned around and left. His figure was getting farther and farther away. On the edge of the magnificent and huge Emperor Dong's palace was a busy construction site. It was very noisy. Construction teams from different places were busy with their own work. The place where the black-robed men were supposed to be building an office building. Were they planning a camp further away? Or a canteen? It was destined to become the area of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. But at present, the construction site was much larger than the already built Emperor Dong's palace. The man in black could clearly feel the footsteps and ambitions of Emperor Dong's palace. It was destined to be the center of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. And the entire Xianyuan city would be absorbed by Emperor Dong's palace bit by bit. Shopping malls, schools, hospitals, supermarkets, clubs, everything in the city would become a part of Emperor Dong's palace. There would no longer be ordinary citizens here. The residents here would be the staff of Emperor Dong's palace, the combatants, and their families. The city would become Li Tianlan's private territory, with a small population, a comfortable environment, luxurious facilities, a lot of funds, and citizens of the city. Many years later, it would inevitably become one of the most beautiful cities in Zhongzhou State, one of the most prosperous cities, and the city with the strongest concentration of residents. That was the new city plan. It was a plan that basically copied the ideas of the Wang family of Beihai, but it summarized some defects of Mount Dibing, so it became more perfect in the later stage. The man in black walked out of the construction site and looked at the city that was changing almost every day. He was silent for a long time. That was the scene of his dream. It was also the future that he had fantasized about a long time ago. It was also the future that a wealthy family that could maintain aggression against all forces and countries and unite around a hegemon-level country should have in his mind. He had imagined many times a scene similar to that of Emperor Dong's palace today. But he couldn't do it. Even if he now controlled the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Even if the Purgatory of Heaven capital was still a superpower in the dark world. But no money. That was the most painful point. Li Guangtu, dressed in black, had a twisted and complicated expression. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was equivalent to the former Li family. But the former Li family did not represent the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Purgatory of Heaven capital, which collapsed and gathered again, did inherit a lot of things from the Li family, including wealth, talents in all aspects, and powerful warriors. But after all, it was not the complete Li family. He had lurked in East Island for many years and accumulated a lot of wealth. Li Guangtu was rich. An investment of hundreds of millions or even billions was not a problem for him. He could even get tens of billions. But compared with Li Tianlan, the little money he had made him look like a pauper. When he first heard about the new city plan, it was like a joke. The income generated by the 5 countries in Eastern Europe was indeed terrifying. And the Flourishing Age Fund had invested a lot in Emperor Dong's palace. Under normal circumstances, Li Tianlan was not short of money. But no one believed that Emperor Dong's palace could really start the new city plan. The establishment of Xianyuan City was like a signal. Donghuang in the shortest time possible, the palace had invested all of its financial resources into Xianyuan City. Money was consumed crazily and Xianyuan City continued to develop. Even during the period when Zhongzhou State gradually reduced its support for Xianyuan City, Emperor Dong's palace did not stop. Where did the money come from? This was the question that puzzled Li Guangtu the most. The professionals of the Purgatory of Heaven capital had already made professional statistics. Even if the interests of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe were beyond imagination, Emperor Dong's palace could not mobilize such a huge amount of funds. As Zhongzhou State's attitude became clearer, the wealthy families that invested in Emperor Dong's palace became more cautious. Such a situation was bound to cause a break in the capital of Emperor Dong's palace. But here was the problem. Not only did Emperor Dong's palace not have a problem with its funds, but they could mobilize more and more money. This could be seen from the overall transformation of Xianyuan City, the construction and expansion of Emperor Dong's palace, and the overall transformation of Xianyuan City. In nearly a year, Chongning Qiancheng, Xianyuan City, launched dozens of large-scale projects in a row. They really did not consider the problem of a break in the capital. In fact, their capital did not break. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had not figured out where the money came from. But today, where the money came from was no longer important. What mattered was that the new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace was actually possible to be realized. At this rate, it would take at most 5 years. 5 years later, Xianyuan City would become a complete Emperor Dong's palace. With all kinds of resources coming in continuously, It meant that in 6 or 7 years at most, the whole Tiannan would become the back garden of Emperor Dong's palace. What everyone did not know, or subconsciously ignored, was Li Guangtu's current martial arts. To be exact, it was the secret that he suddenly appeared after many years of dormancy. In the past 2 decades, in everyone's impression, the biggest traitor in Zhongzhou state had already fallen. Summer Solstice had resisted Li Guangtu's attack with a murderous weapon at the cost of her martial arts foundation. While destroying the murderous weapon, she had almost completely destroyed Li Guangtu's martial arts foundation. He had completely fallen under the siege of several invincible realm experts and many experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. This was everyone's impression. No one knew that he could recover, lurk in East Island, and set up the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When the Purgatory of Heaven capital first appeared, deity, who could compete with Wang Tianzong, could be said to be brilliant. But except for a few people, no one knew the true identity of deity. His identity was completely exposed in the chaos in Eastern Europe 2 years ago. But with the eternal sword above Mormons ending Wang Tianzong, that era had come to an end. Maybe someone would pay attention to Wang Tianzong. But there were very few people who paid attention to Li Guangtu. There were even fewer people who paid attention to Li Guangtu's martial arts. Almost no one wanted to know how Li Guangtu could set foot on the peak of the invincible realm, when his foundation was almost ruined. The martial arts that Li Guangtu had been exposed to since he was a child was the 24 moves of sword. The 24 moves of sword of the Li family. But it also contained a lot of the strengths of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan's martial arts. All his martial arts foundation had completed a most desperate nirvana, when the foundation was almost completely ruined. He embarked on his own path when he was in the worst state. The longevity seal and the immortal seal. The inspiration absorbed from the 24 moves of sword transformed into a new unique technique, which became the key to reshaping his foundation. The most important thing was that he used to have the dragon vein, although it was only a part of the dragon vein. Now, although his dragon vein had inexplicably disappeared, a large amount of vitality was still nourishing his flesh and blood. Powerful recovery ability. Martial arts that reshaped the foundation. All of this meant that no matter how serious his injury was, as long as he was not dead, he could recover faster than others and other experts at the same level. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, he was the first to wake up from a coma. He stayed in Tiannan for 2 years and didn't make a move. Everyone thought that his injury was serious, or even completely destroyed. He stood in the darkness where no one could see and silently recovered from his injury. His injury was more serious than that of Lin Fengting. But today his state was even slightly better than Lin Fengting's. Those injuries had not healed yet. But now he was the real #1 expert in the dark world. Li Guangtu was not in a hurry. He was not in a hurry at all. He felt that he still had enough time. The game between Beihai, Zhongzhou state, and the giant group had been in a stalemate. One advanced and the other retreated, and the 3 parties were trying their best to maintain a balance. Before the result of the game came out, it was difficult for Li Tianlan to get out of the desert prison. And at Li Tianlan's age and physical condition, it was almost impossible for him to enter the invincible realm. In Li Guangtu's view, such a game would not have a relatively clear result until after next year's election at the earliest. In other words, he had at least a year to keep a low profile and recuperate. It was difficult for him to be sure that he would recover in a year, but he had his advantages. The longevity seal and the immortal seal were enough to make his state better in the next year, and further get rid of Lin Fengting, who was also recovering. At that time, he would undoubtedly have more confidence. Even if there were any accidents in the middle, the time of the game would be further extended. Li Guangtu had already begun to think of ways to intervene in the internal game of Zhongzhou state, intending to create some chaos. But he never thought that Chen Fangqing would be so stupid as to start a bullshit termination plan. The most ridiculous thing was that the plan was completely exposed not long after it started. Li Guangtu, who was not mentally prepared, was completely dumbfounded as he watched all of this develop rapidly. Before anyone could react, the academics had successfully withdrawn, and Chen Fangqing, who was in control of the game, directly began his most intense means. He no longer paid attention to the so-called balance, nor did he care about the impact in the future. Therefore, because of the withdrawal of the academics, Chen Fangqing, who had no choice, blocked the desert prison in an extremely radical way. The game had become a real war. There was no doubt that Chen Fangqing lost. He might not be a complete failure now, but Li Tianlan always came out of the desert prison, and the shocking sword over the desert meant that the Giant Group and the Southeast Group had achieved a stage victory in this war. Haoyue Group had an accident. Special Warfare Group had an accident. All this was Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao's counterattack. The subsequent development was almost not difficult to guess. Li Guangtu couldn't understand why Chen Fangqing was so stupid. Maybe he was not stupid, but from the moment the termination plan was exposed, he had no choice. The termination plan was not a mistake. The only mistake was that it was exposed. Li Guangtu didn't bother to think about the inside story. The reality was in front of him. He had wanted to wait a little longer. But Li Tianlan's strength was beyond his expectation. According to Li Tianlan's current growth rate, in less than 3 years, even if he recovered from his injury, he might not be able to defeat Li Tianlan. Not to mention 3 years later, even now, Li Tianlan had Xian Yuanfeng in his hand. In the case that Xian Yuanfeng had sufficient energy, he was not sure that he could win. This was a terrible thing. For Li Guangtu, this was even the most terrible thing. The most terrible thing. Once he couldn't defeat Li Tianlan or was suppressed by Li Tianlan, he could imagine what would happen to him. Everything that belonged to him would be taken away by Li Tianlan. Because they were all from the Li family. For many people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital, their sense of belonging was actually the same. There were not many people who were loyal to Li Tianlan. There were also not many people who were loyal to Li Guangtu. Most people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital had a sense of belonging to the Li family. Once he was left behind by Li Tianlan, with his infinite future possibilities, he could almost make Li Guangtu lose everything in the shortest time. So Li Guangtu didn't want to wait, and he didn't dare to wait. He had planned to wait a few more years. When Emperor Dong's palace completely swallowed up Xianyuan City, and when everything in Emperor Dong's palace was completed, as long as he killed Li Tianlan, he could take over everything left by Li Tianlan in the shortest time, and become the new Emperor Dong. This meant that he could get a whole city, a city built with a lot of money that he didn't even dare to imagine. If the purgatory of Heaven Capital got the complete Emperor Dong's palace and Xianyuan City, it was almost equivalent to getting the whole Tiannan. The purgatory of Heaven Capital would become the most terrifying force in the dark world. But Li Tianlan's speed of growth made him dare not delay at all. Under the sun, Li Guangtu stood on the edge of the construction site, muttered something to himself silently, and then shook his head. He stood there and waited for a minute. A pitch-black Passat slowly drove over. If it was in Tiannan 2 years ago, it could be said to be an absolute luxury car. But in the current Xianyuan City, it was a completely inconspicuous ordinary car. Li Guangtu sat in the car, rubbed his forehead, and let out a long sigh. How's Moon God? The driver was Daybreak, another invincible realm expert of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. His injury had completely recovered, but he hadn't stabilized his realm for the time being. His powerful aura was constantly fluctuating. Not good. Li Guangtu whispered, very not good. His voice was a little depressed. Daybreak was silent for a while, started the car and whispered, it's not necessarily hopeless. I've heard of Silver Eyes in Beihai. She can be regarded as an authoritative figure in this field. Now the cooperation between Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace is at a critical period. Even if it's to please Li Tianlan, the Wang family of Beihai will inevitably work harder to let Silver Eyes save Moon God. It's a good thing to let her stay here for the time being. She's too slow. Maybe I should talk to the Wang family of Beihai, of course, after the final battle. Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes. After the final battle, he would kill Li Tianlan and annex Emperor Dong's palace before Zhongzhou State reacted. And after the final battle, if Li Tianlan died, the current situation in Zhongzhou State would be different again. Daybreak was silent for a while and didn't speak. How's Dawn doing in East Island? Li Guangtu suddenly asked. Everything is going well. Daybreak nodded. My Shiranui is very cooperative. At present, Dawn has regained control of Liuhua Palace. In Heaven Capital, our pawns have been activated. At present, we can be sure that in order to recapture the south of Beihai province, East Island will invest a considerable part of its power in this final battle. Their interior will inevitably be empty. With the cooperation of Liuhua Palace, we can get back part of the power of East Island. Liuhua Palace was a name that had been dim in the dark world for several years. It was also a martial arts force that was as famous as Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School a few years ago. Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liuhua Palace, was also recognized as the peak ninja in the whole dark world. He controlled the most elite divine wind force in East Island. In terms of actual power, he was no less than Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurosumi. But in the final battle of Heaven Capital 5 years ago, Shinichi Miyamoto of the Invincible Realm died in the hands of Tribulation. Therefore, Tribulation broke through and directly entered the Invincible Realm from the Chi-controlling realm. But Liuhua Palace never recovered. After the Purgatory of Heaven Capital entered East Island, Mai Shiranui, the young palace master, was the first to seek refuge with the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The sphere of influence of Liuhua Palace was maintained under the protection of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. As the Purgatory of Heaven Capital gradually withdrew from East Island in the past 2 years, Liuhua Palace was annexed by the other 2 martial arts forces all the time. Now there was a chance to establish contact with the Purgatory of Heaven Capital again. Mai Shiranui, who had no way out, had no chance to refuse. When the final battle takes place, go to East Island and kill all the Tom, Dick and Harry. I'll see the result of the final battle, and consider whether to talk to the Mikado of East Island. Li Kuangtu gently raised the corner of his mouth, and his smile was a little mocking. Daybreak was now an invincible realm superior. Together with Dawn and Phoenix, he would come to East Island with the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. When East Island put most of its power into the final battle, they could sweep everything. After the final battle, in the worst case, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could regain control of East Island. The best case was to control the Zhongzhou state and the dark world of East Island, unify Tiannan, conquer the underground world of Southeast Asia, and establish a real dynasty. Li Kuangtu looked out of the window. His eyes were extremely bright, like 2 wildfires burning. Daybreak hesitated and said softly, "East Island won't be a big problem. I can go to Beihai with you." Li Kuangtu was silent for a while, then slowly shook his head and said, "It's not necessary." He was confident enough in his strength. God. Li Tianlan may not be able to take him down with Xianyuan Feng. Daybreak said calmly. Li Kuangtu laughed. "I'm not fighting with him alone. Xianyuan Feng is really strong, but it's just a murderous weapon in essence. Its energy will be exhausted. After all, in the final battle he will face more than one invincible realm expert. When Xianyuan Feng's energy is almost exhausted, I will make a move, and it will be enough to decide his life or death in an instant." Daybreak was silent for a while, and held the steering wheel tightly. He glanced at Li Kuangtu through the rearview mirror, hesitated, and said softly, "Your Highness." Li Kuangtu glanced at him. "How much strength has he recovered now?" Daybreak asked softly. This was something that every high-level official in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was very concerned about. Everyone knew that Li Kuangtu recovered very fast in secret, and he was in a good state. This was also an important source of confidence for them to plot against East Island again. But no one knew how much Li Kuangtu had recovered. Li Kuangtu was silent for a while and said calmly, "In the normal state, I've recovered about 70%, which is about the same as my heyday before I went to Eastern Europe." Daybreak's eyes lit up. He went to the heyday of Eastern Europe. At that time, Li Kuangtu was a god, with the strength that could break through the peak of the invincible realm at any time. This was Li Kuangtu's normal state now. Li Kuangtu smiled and continued to say, "If necessary, I can exert about 90% of my strength in a short time, which is enough to deal with any situation." Li Kuangtu's 90% strength now. This was not his peak state now, but it had definitely surpassed the limit of the peak of the invincible realm. Daybreak was silent for a while and laughed. "Then I'll go back to East Island." He was talking about going back to East Island. Not going there. He was going back to the territory that used to belong to him. Li Kuangtu nodded and whispered, "We'll get back everything we lost." Chapter 903. When he walked out of the train station of Xianyuan City, Yuan Lin even thought that he had come to the wrong place. In his initial impression, Xianyuan City should have been a small city belonging to Annan State. After it was split, it became one of the cities belonging to Tiannan State. Tiannan had always been in a state of chaos, with undercurrents surging. It had never been peaceful. This small city, originally called Tunan, was full of destruction, crime, violence and barbarism. The population here was getting smaller and smaller, and the city was getting more and more dilapidated. Every street and every road in the urban area should be full of decay and depression. This was the Tunan City in Yuan Lin's impression. After Tunan City became Xianyuan City, Zhongzhou State, Emperor Dong's palace, and many wealthy families and investment institutions in Zhongzhou State invested a lot of money here. In various reports, the new Xianyuan City was changing rapidly. Yuan Lin had read many reports submitted to the cabinet. In his impression, the so-called rapid change should just barely get rid of the previous appearance of Tunan City. At most, it should be a little better than Tunan City. It should be almost the same as a county in the inland of Zhongzhou State. At most, it should be a relatively well-developed county. After all, how could a small city with a very poor foundation develop so fast in 2 years? But the moment he walked out of the station, the scenes in front of him suddenly made him a little absent-minded. There were indeed no high-rise buildings like those in Huating, Yuzhou and Xianyuan City. The buildings here were relatively low, but absolutely did not feel the slightest sense of dilapidation. New. They were all obviously newly built buildings. Every building had a different style, and they were arranged neatly. There was an exaggerated distance between the buildings, but they were not empty. They were all filled with lawns and gardens, and in the middle of the lawns and gardens, there were clean and tidy paths paved with stone slabs, quiet and tidy. Between the buildings on both sides were wide and somewhat incredible streets. The smooth streets stretched all the way to the end of the site. Perhaps it was because the south was relatively warm. Even in winter, flowers were still blooming on the green belt that isolated the sidewalks and driveways. Under the bright sun, the fresh air with almost no industrial pollution blew over. Both the vehicles and the pedestrians in sight were indescribably leisurely. No, it was not leisurely. Yuan Lin was stunned for a long time before he realized the problem. As the first deputy director of the cabinet office and the chief secretary of the prime minister, he spent most of his time in Yuzhou or inspecting various places in Zhongzhou State with Chen Fangqing. He traveled to many places. However, he had never seen a city like Xianyuan City. The biggest difference was the population density. There were very few people in Xianyuan City. It was so little that it was hard to believe. There was no heavy traffic, no dense flow of people. The wide streets, the beautiful city, the fresh air, and the almost cold population made everything in the city look very leisurely. It was an indescribable feeling of comfort. Is this really Tiannan? Tiannan Xianyuan City? Yuan Lin was dumbfounded. He walked out of the station in a daze and walked forward in a daze. Only when the person in charge of receiving him greeted him did he manage to regain his senses. Hello, Director Yuan. I'm Xiao Su from the police department. At the exit, a tall and straight young man wearing gold-rimmed glasses smiled warmly and respectfully reached out his hands to shake hands with Yuan Lin. Yuan Lin came back to his senses and took a deep breath. His tone was inexplicably low. Let's go. Xiao Su nodded and took the luggage from Yuan Lin's hands. She said softly, the car is in the underground car park. Yuan Lin grunted in acknowledgement and followed little Su down the elevator. The underground car park was also huge and clean with soft lights. There were not many cars parked inside, but it made Yuan Lin a little dazed again. As far as the eye could see, the sparse cars parked in various positions were basically all less than 300,000 yuan. 300,000 yuan was considered a small amount, and there were no less than 500,000 yuan. Yuan Lin looked at the Hyundai in front of Xiao Su. No matter how he looked at it, it felt shabby. This was Xianyuan City. This was Xianyuan City? Yuan Lin blinked his eyes. Everything was like a dream. He sat in the back of the car in silence. The sense of superiority in his heart had disappeared without a trace. The black Hyundai slowly left the car park, out of the station, and drove into the wide streets of Xianyuan City. Yuan Lin quietly looked at everything outside the window. Exquisite buildings, huge spacing, and sufficient greenery. The willfulness of Xianyuan City could be seen everywhere. No country could make such an extravagant urban planning. This was almost not a city, but a luxurious and exquisite huge garden. With such an exaggerated design style, how many people could this city accommodate after it was built? He had seen the urban planning submitted by the Xianyuan City Hall in the cabinet. The new Xianyuan City was about 6,500 square kilometers. Such a city area was not large. Compared with Yuzhou, which was 17,000 square kilometers, the area of Xianyuan City was only a little more than one-third of Yuzhou. But Yuzhou had a population of more than 20 million. What about Xianyuan City? Yuan Lin was not an expert in this area. He could only make a rough judgment. Such a city plan could accommodate at most hundreds of thousands of people. Using more than one-third of Yuzhou to accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. And it was not hundreds of thousands of people. 300,000 yuan. 400,000 yuan? What did it mean? Yuan Lin took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "The development of Xianyuan City is really good." Yes, that's for sure. Only 1/5 of Xianyuan City has been completed. There are 5 districts in Xianyuan City, which are named simply North, South, East, West, and the city center. Now most of the places in the city have basically been demolished. Working day and night, the entire Xianyuan City is basically a construction site. We are now in the North District, where the construction has just started. However, the reconstruction of the city center has been completed. Only after going there and taking a look will you know how exaggerated it is. If this goes on, when Xianyuan City is completed, the entire city can almost be said to be a luxury. Hearing this, Xiaosu smiled and said, "But that's the future, Yuan Hall. Everything that you can see now is equivalent to 1/5 of Xianyuan City." Only after a while, Yuan Lin whispered to himself, "Where does the money come from? That's what our team leader wants to know." Little Su shrugged. Yuan Lin did not speak anymore. He seemed to be trying to figure out the source of the money of Emperor Dong's palace. He was Chen Fangqing's secretary. Chen Fangqing was the prime minister, and the main person in charge of the financial department of Zhongzhou State must be his confidant. Zhongzhou State still attached great importance to the construction of Xianyuan City. In the past 2 years, there had been 3 appropriations, totaling nearly 40 billion yuan. But this number was obviously not enough to build a city with almost nothing. Judging from the current situation, it was not nothing at all. But Emperor Dong's palace didn't want anything at all, and even spent money to demolish and rebuild the original foundation. 40 billion yuan was not even enough for the most basic construction. Plus the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries, and the investment of the wealthy families. Yuan Lin did not think that Emperor Dong's palace could build such a city that could be described as a luxury. The black Hyundai drove into the city center in silence. Yuan Lin watched quietly, and his heart became more and more numb. Exquisite buildings, huge statues, gorgeous street lights, lush greenery, a grand square. The Hyundai drove all the way and finally entered a small forest. Well, a small forest in the city center. The corner of Yuan Lin's mouth twitched as if he was stimulated. The forest in the city center. He felt that the city center and the forest could not be connected at all. No matter how small this small forest was, it could be used to build at least a large residential area, a business circle, or there were too many choices. But Emperor Dong's palace willfully built here, or rather, preserved a forest. All the buildings around seemed to adapt to the style of this forest, and it did not look out of place as a whole. Yuan Lin raised his head stiffly. The road in front of him slowly went up along a not obvious slope. At the highest point at the end of his sight was a pure white building like a castle. In a verdant forest, the castle was looming, with an indescribable pure beauty. The corner of Yuan Lin's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back. He had made up his mind to complain about Emperor Dong's palace when he returned to Yuzhou. This city was luxurious and beautiful beyond Yuan Lin's imagination. But all of this meant nothing in his eyes. This was completely the capriciousness of the rich. To be exact, it was a reckless waste of resources. Hyundai kept going up. The pure white castle in front of him was getting closer and closer. Yuanlin opened his mouth little by little. He watched the castle getting higher and higher. The soft sound faintly echoed in the forest. His eyes widened. He was dumbfounded. He was really dumbfounded. This forest might be a hill preserved by Emperor Dong's palace. But the problem was that this pure white castle was not on the top of the mountain at all. It was a huge, exquisite, and luxurious castle. A castle floating in the air. It was really a castle in the air. It floated about 20 or 30 meters high in the air, gently rotating at an imperceptible speed. The doorman trotted over and opened the door respectfully. Yuanlin got out of the car and looked up dumbfounded. From his point of view, he could see the huge base of the floating castle. The pure white base was engraved with countless patterns, forming a pattern of a clock. It was dusk, and night was approaching. The base of the castle was shining with gorgeous light, illuminating the whole top of the mountain dreamily. What was this? What the hell was this? Damn it! What was this? City in the Sky, the most high-end club in Tiannan. Su's tone was a little complicated. This is an industry belonging to Emperor Dong's palace, and Xianyuan City is the first one. According to their plan, in the next 1 or 2 years, branches of City in the Sky will be established in every first-tier and second-tier city in Zhongzhou State. The initial plan is to establish more than 50 similar clubs. Yuanlin swallowed hard and murmured, "How did they do it?" "The power of money and privilege." Little Su chuckled. Yuanlin watched this scene quietly. In a daze, he did not notice a black Passat slowly parking in the parking space near him. The doorman nearby wanted to run over and open the door. In the driver's seat, Daybreak waved his hand. He turned off the car, but did not get out. Instead, he looked at Yuanlin not far away. "The chief secretary of the cabinet?" Daybreak raised his eyebrows and laughed. "Why does he look like a bumpkin? Is he scared out of his wits? No, he doesn't know how to get up, does he? Does he want to fly up there? He must want to fly up. When did you become so mean?" Li Guangde glanced at him with a smile. Daybreak laughed and asked, "Your Highness, are you here to see him today?" Li Guangde leaned against the back of the chair and narrowed his eyes. "Maybe, but he's not the one who asked me out." Chapter 904. The City in the Air. The most high-end clubhouse in Xianyuan City. As the Prime Minister's chief secretary, Yuanlin was not a real bumpkin. He had been to so many so-called high-end clubhouses, but he had never seen such a bluffing clubhouse. It was a real floating castle. The whiteness was not dry, but a kind of warm and soft white that seemed to reflect light. The flickering light under the base of the castle was indescribably gorgeous in the gradually falling night. Yuanlin was silent for a long time before he whispered, "How does it fly?" "It's an optical illusion," Xiao Su whispered with a smile. "Under the castle is a new type of alloy, which has introduced the most advanced optical camouflage technology of Zhongzhou State. The alloy is mixed with a lot of invisible materials. The whole castle is basically made of white marble, which can provide a stable light source. The interior is reinforced by superalloys. In this state, whether it is day or night, the invisible alloy below can remain invisible, so it looks like this castle is floating in the air." "They are really daring," Yuanlin said with difficulty. The most advanced optical camouflage technology of Zhongzhou State was the technology of the Dongqing clan. It was still a secret and was basically used on some cutting-edge weapons. But Emperor Dong's palace used it to build a clubhouse? Even if they dare to think, they need money. This castle, together with nearly 5 tons of alloy below and some technology, costs more than 700 million. And there is a reason for this height. The height of the castle is 22 meters, which is just beyond the attack limit of ordinary chi-controlling realm and ice-condensing realm experts. There is also an automatic weapon system in the alloy below the castle. If it is fired at full force, enough firepower can even suppress a thunder-shocking realm expert for a short time. The security guards inside are all elites selected by Emperor Dong's palace. They rotate regularly. This clubhouse can be said to be the safest place in Xianyuan City, except for Emperor Dong's palace and the city hall. The membership fee is 100 million in the first year, and after a strict inspection, it is 30 million every year. Xiao Su shook his head and sighed with emotion. 100 million? Yuan Lin gritted his teeth. There was no club in Zhongzhou State, or even the whole world, that dared to ask for an entrance fee of 100 million yuan. Moreover, there was an annual fee of 30 million after that. Xiao Su narrowed his eyes and nodded. It said that it's the idea of the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. She proposed the new city plan, and the city in the air is also a part of this plan. The membership fee of 100 million seems to be a lot, but according to our investigation, over the past 2 years, we've received more than 200 applications to join, but less than 1/10 of them can really become members of the city in the air. The club will conduct a preliminary review, and the final decision on whether to accept a new member is in Emperor Dong's palace. What's the point? Yuan Lin's mind was still a little muddled. Various thoughts kept wandering in his mind, and eventually he had no more thoughts. This is the alliance of Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Su curled up the corner of his mouth. Pure financial resources are not enough to join the city in the air. One must have enough value. Emperor Dong's palace will gather all the members together to achieve a state similar to sharing resources, thus forming a diverse alliance. This is just the first club. Emperor Dong's palace plans to spread the city in the air all over the country. At that time, it may be divided into first-level clubs, second-level clubs, or even third-level clubs. Different levels have different thresholds, forming one interest circle after another around Emperor Dong's palace. The alliance of all levels will continue to run and create endless benefits for Emperor Dong's palace. Under such circumstances, the annual membership fee is not worth mentioning at all, because everyone can earn back several times or even dozens of times. Yuan Lin's expression changed. He was shocked and angry, and he said in a hoarse voice, "This is tantamount to squeezing the resources of Zhongzhou State to create benefits for Xianyuan City. If this alliance is big enough, it's almost equivalent to invasion. It's..." Xiao Su turned his head and glanced at Yuan Lin. His eyes were sharp and calm. "It can't be regarded as invasion." He lowered his voice and said softly, "Unless Hall Yuan regards Emperor Dong's palace as the enemy of Zhongzhou State." Yuan Lin's expression suddenly froze for a moment. Xiao Su took a deep breath and said no more. He took out a badge from his pocket and took Yuan Lin a few steps forward. The light at the base of the castle shrouded their bodies. The exquisite badge also shone. Under Yuan Lin's dumbfounded expression, a crack suddenly appeared in the empty air in front of him. The crack grew bigger and bigger, and turned into a door. At the door was a simple but not monotonous grand hall. A row of young girls in uniform smiled sweetly and said, "Welcome." Yuan Lin walked in silently and entered the elevator. The elevator went all the way up and officially entered the club. Yuan Lin, who was dazzled along the way, was led into a private room by a waiter. In the private room that looked like the study of a great European aristocrat in the Middle Ages, a middle-aged man with a cold face was looking at a notebook in front of him, and typing quickly on the keyboard. He was obviously very familiar with Yuan Lin. When he heard the door open, he just glanced at it casually, nodded and said, "Sit down," and then continued to busy with the work at hand. Xiao Su poured a cup of tea for Yuan Lin and quietly left. Yuan Lin picked up the teacup and took a sip. In the rich tea fragrance, he finally regained his calmness. In the intensive typing sound, Yuan Lin glanced at him and asked, "Dahai, are you a member here?" "To be exact, I'm the first batch of members." Lu Dahai responded with no expression. They were college classmates, and they slept in the same dormitory. There was no need for any courtesy after many years of friendship. He shook his hand, picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip. He sighed and said, "There are a total of 18 members in the city in the sky. I'm the first batch and the last one. To be exact, this place is not mine, but the cabinet's. I'm just using it temporarily." "Have you paid?" Yuan Lin raised his eyebrows. "Of course." Lu Dahai sneered. "A total of 100 million. It's a special fund approved by the cabinet. Xianyuan City is very confident now, so it's natural to collect money." "You have a lot of resentment," Yuan Lin said with a smile. "The cabinet pays for you to come here and enjoy. What are you dissatisfied with?" Lu Dahai typed a line of words on the keyboard. He seemed to be dissatisfied and then deleted it completely. He clicked the save button, turned off the computer, picked up a lot of materials, and sat on the sofa opposite Yuan Lin. It's not resentment. His voice was low and dull. To be exact, it's dissatisfaction and a little fear. He opened the drawer and took out a box of free top-grade cigars provided by the club. He didn't speak for a long time. Tell me the details. Yuan Lin glanced at him and said slowly. Lu Dehai was a typical scholarly cadre. Although he had a good relationship with Yuan Lin, such a person would basically not be assigned to any group and become a confidant of a group. He didn't have a specific position in the cabinet. He was an investigator at the level of deputy governor. And in the past 2 years, Lu Dehai spent most of his time in Tiannan. To be exact, he was in Xianyuan City. He formed a research group with elites drawn from various departments. From the beginning to the present, they had been doing research in Xianyuan City. Some extremely important materials that didn't involve the secrets of Emperor Dong's palace were basically provided by Lu Dehai to Zhongzhou State. Obviously, Emperor Dong's palace also knew this. They didn't oppose or support the arrival of Lu Dehai, who didn't have the mark of a group. They completely pretended not to see him. In the past century, Lu Dehai had submitted more and more reports to the cabinet. In the beginning, he submitted 1 document a month, but now he submitted 3 or 4 documents a month. Basically, he submitted 1 document a week. Yuan Lin had 2 purposes for coming here this time. First, he wanted to secretly meet with a big shot in Tiannan on behalf of Chen Fangqing. Second, he wanted to contact Lu Dehai and learn more about the current situation of Xianyuan City. Xianyuan City. Lu Dehai lit the cigar. In the smoke, he thought for a long time seriously and said slowly, in the past 6 months, Xianyuan City has changed a lot, a lot. Everything you see now is basically built in the past 6 months. The city plan of the city hall has been submitted to the cabinet. It's only a part, not the whole. I've already said this in the report. Half a year ago, Xianyuan City was always being demolished. Except for the construction of Emperor Dong's palace, they only built an area near the city hall. I collected some relevant information and intelligence, and carefully observed some investors who entered Xianyuan City. Then I asked Xiao Wang to make a relatively simple model, which can roughly analyze the financial resources of Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Wang, you should know that I'm a senior investigator of the Ministry of Finance, and I'm very professional in this aspect. Judging from the financial resources of Emperor Dong's palace half a year ago, their construction of Xianyuan City was relatively normal. That kind of construction speed allowed them to keep some relatively abundant funds. Lu Dehai took a puff of the cigar and said, but the situation suddenly changed half a year ago. The city hall began to introduce all kinds of projects. The urban planning images were thrown out as if they had been prepared for a long time. The whole city was being demolished. The downtown area near the city hall changed day by day. Famous designers from all over the world were running to Xianyuan City. They gathered to design different buildings, streets, and greenery. The young mayor Ning of Xianyuan City said in an interview that he wanted the whole Xianyuan City to be a luxury. A large amount of money has been spent. Let me give you an example. Xianyuan City has been developing for 2 years. In the past 6 months, they have spent more money than the previous 1.5 years. Their expenditure is about 6 times more than the previous 1.5 years. In the past 6 months, some wealthy families have reduced the amount of investment in Xianyuan City under some pressure. The transfer of interests from the 5 countries in Eastern Europe has not increased significantly. Zhongzhou State has not allocated funds to Xianyuan City either. So where does the money come from? It's not a little more money out of thin air, but hundreds of billions of yuan out of thin air. According to the current situation, it may be more than hundreds of billions. Because the transformation of Xianyuan City is getting faster and faster, Emperor Dong's palace doesn't seem to worry about the lack of money at all. Such a huge amount of money means that there must be more than one top consortium behind Emperor Dong's palace supporting the development of Xianyuan City. Lu Dehai hesitated, and his voice was a little complicated. What I worry and fear most is whether the wealthy families secretly supporting the finance of Emperor Dong's palace in Xianyuan City are the wealthy families of Zhongzhou State. His voice was a little hoarse. If they are not, will the built Xianyuan city still be the Xianyuan city of Zhongzhou State? Yuan Lin was shocked and looked up at Lu Dehai. Lu Dehai lowered his head and was strangely silent. In this case, it almost meant that Lu Dehai was accusing Emperor Dong's palace of treason and turning to foreign consortia. He thought about that possibility and shook his head subconsciously. Could it be the Wang family of Beihai? They definitely have the strength to do so. The financial situation of the Wang family of Beihai is very stable, and there has been no fluctuation in the past 2 years. Of course, they also paid for the construction of Xianyuan City, but most of their support for Xianyuan City comes from armaments. We can't rule out the possibility that the Wang family of Beihai secretly supports Emperor Dong's palace, but it's unlikely. Such a large amount of money is not a small amount for the Wang family of Beihai. It's illogical to give it to Emperor Dong's palace for nothing. So you suspect the foreign consortia? Yuan Lin was thoughtful. Half a year ago, this node was very critical. Everything in Emperor Dong's palace was normal, and I had no way to know the information about the desert prison and Li Tianlan. Lu Dehai said calmly. Li Tianlan. Half a year ago, Yuan Lin thought of something. Military counselor went to the desert prison half a year ago. Who is military counselor? Lu Dehai narrowed his eyes. I don't know. Yuan Lin shook his head. I'm not sure yet. Lu Dehai looked at Yuan Lin silently for a while. Military counselor was the supermaster of Samsara Palace, not a member of the system of Zhongzhou State. How could such a person go to the desert prison? Then he thought of Dongqing Wudi and felt powerless. He shook his head and changed the topic, saying slowly, let's not talk about where the money comes from. The current plan of Xianyuan City doesn't seem to be building a city. Yuan Lin glanced at him. It gives me the feeling that the development direction of Xianyuan City is completely like an independent kingdom, or a foundation that only belongs to Emperor Dong's palace, with the whole city as the foundation. Lu Dehai said. New city plan, I know. Yuan Lin nodded. No, you don't know. Or the reality is more exaggerated than you think, and much more exaggerated. Lu Dehai took a deep breath. He casually flipped through the information in his hand and confirmed the data. According to our research results, combined with their city planning map, most of the buildings in Xianyuan City are unscientific and unreasonable. To be exact, they waste a lot of resources. When you came here, you should have seen that there are no tall buildings in Xianyuan City, and the distance between buildings is almost extravagant. If this city is built, it can only accommodate 150,000 people, and the limit should not exceed 250,000. Compared with Yuzhou, the area of Xianyuan City can accommodate at least 8 to 10 million people. But here, the limit is only 200,000 people, which means that one person in Xianyuan City occupies the living space of dozens of people in Zhongzhou State. What's more, Emperor Dong's palace doesn't intend to let the population of this city reach the limit. Do you know what the most precious thing in Xianyuan City is now? It's not money, it's the household registration. The household registration of Xianyuan City in the future. The City Hall hasn't released any relevant information yet, but from various sources, Xianyuan City's requirements for household registration will be unbelievably strict. At present, there are countless families who want to join Xianyuan City and settle down here, but only a few families have been promised by the City Hall and can settle down here in the future. The City Hall is currently considering the problem of household registration, followed by the problem of social welfare. It can be foreseen that, like this city which is almost luxurious, the social welfare of Xianyuan City will also be so high that it will be stunning. The social welfare of Xianyuan City is also astonishingly high. Because of the small number of people in Xianyuan City, there are only a few 100,000 or 200,000 people in Xianyuan City. With the financial resources that Emperor Dong's palace has shown right now, they can even afford to live for free. Lu Dehai paused and suddenly said, Do you know what this means? Yuan Lin's face was gloomy. He nodded and said, It means that Emperor Dong's palace hasn't considered things outside of Xianyuan City, including Zhongzhou State. Emperor Dong's palace first considers the environment of Xianyuan City and Tiannan, and then Zhongzhou State. He narrowed his eyes and said coldly, The wolf's ambition is as clear as day. Some insider information shows that in the future, to join the household registration of Xianyuan City, one must first become a part of Emperor Dong's palace. That is to say, outsiders are not welcome here. In the whole city, in the long run, even in the whole province, as long as one is from Tiannan, he must be a member of Emperor Dong's palace. This should be a recent change made by Emperor Dong's palace, not the original part of the new city plan. It may come from the military counselor of Samsara Palace, or the new patriarch of the Lin clan. It may also be Li Tianlan's own idea. They have learned from the game between Zhongzhou State and the Wang family of Beihai. Emperor Dong's palace wants to completely turn Tiannan into a part of itself. It's naked, not as subtle as the Wang family of Beihai. A province. Everyone is a member of Emperor Dong's palace. At least one of their family members will work in Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace will build the best city, the most luxurious conditions, the highest social welfare. All of this is like a dream. If this scene is maintained many years later, people in Tiannan province will be immersed in this kind of life. They will be used to it. When Zhongzhou State treats Emperor Dong's palace like the Wang family of Beihai, what will happen to the people in Emperor Dong's palace whose best living conditions are destroyed? Yuan Lin's body trembled slightly. Lu Dahai's voice was a little difficult. Put yourself in their shoes. They will tear up all those who want to destroy their living environment like madmen, regardless of life or death, regardless of the consequences at all costs. Yuan Lin suddenly felt a bone-chilling coldness. There was a long silence in the private room. Yuan Lin took a big drag on his cigar and reached out to take a pile of documents in front of Lu Dahai. It's a worthwhile trip. He forced a smile, sorted out the documents and solemnly said, "When I go back, I will give these to the Prime Minister as soon as possible." Lu Dahai nodded and asked in confusion, "Aren't you going back now?" "I made an appointment to meet someone here." Yuan Lin smiled, looked down at his watch, and said, 10 minutes left." Lu Dahai immediately understood what he meant. He nodded and said, "Got it. I'll go first." Yuan Lin stood up with a smile and walked him to the door. Then he reached out to hold his old classmate's hand and said softly, "Thank you." After a pause, he continued with a smile, "But your time in Tiannan shouldn't be too long." Lu Dahai smiled and turned to leave. Yuan Lin stopped smiling and returned to the private room with a heavy heart. He picked up the pile of documents and read them carefully. What he didn't want to admit was that there was a touch of fear in his heart. For him, the stronger Emperor Dong's palace was, the brighter the future would be, and the gloomier his future would be. He was different from Lu Dahai. He was different from most people. He was Chen Fangqing's secretary. It had been less than 24 hours since Li Tianlan came out of the desert prison. Chen Fangqing had lost 3 immediate family members. Chen Lijuan even died in front of him. The bloody and fierce aura came to him with a strong desire for revenge. Yuan Lin could clearly feel the danger and tragedy. Emperor Dong's palace, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Prime Minister. The 3 parties were really at each other's throats now. If Chen Fangqing failed, it could be foreseen that Yuan Lin's future would be bleak. This was the best result. If there was a little mistake, not to mention a bleak future, it would be a problem whether he could live or not. Yuan Lin lowered his head and carefully studied the documents in his hand. His body trembled slightly, and he gritted his teeth. "You're scared. And very angry. Does this mean that you have no confidence in the next development of the situation?" A voice with a faint smile suddenly sounded. Yuan Lin's body suddenly shook, and he raised his head reflexively. "Who?" There was a familiar sound of wind in the private room. Yuan Lin almost instantly thought of the heavy snow in front of the cabinet office. It was an extremely fierce wind and an extremely sharp edge. The invisible wind in front of him was not as sharp as that, but it was much heavier. He thought of Chen Lijuan's body with thousands of penetrating wounds. Yuan Lin's face was pale, and there was some panic and despair in his eyes. A figure quickly outlined in the seat where Lu Dahai had sat. This was a figure that looked slender and tall. There seemed to be some fluctuations wrapped around his whole body, like starlight or clouds. No one could see his face clearly. He sat opposite Yuan Lin. Yuan Lin could vaguely see that he was smiling. He smiled and nodded, seeming to be very polite. I'm just a lobbyist. Night fell. The shining light of the city in the air became more and more magnificent and dreamy. The Passat was still parked there. Daybreak leaned against the seat, listening to the music, and closed his eyes to rest. Li Kuangtu gently tapped the edge of the window, thinking about something. The heavy and violent wind blew from a distance, all the way into the city in the air. Daybreak instinctively opened his eyes, and his eyes were alert. He's here. Li Kuangtu said faintly. Daybreak frowned, thinking of the wind just now, and whispered, "It's a little strange." "It's not his real body." Li Kuangtu shook his head. His fingers were still tapping the edge of the window. One after another, transparent sword chi slowly spread out along the window, constantly extending upward and entering the city in the air. The space in the box was twisted silently. There was no sound of wind. The air twisted into a vortex at a speed visible to the naked eye. The vortex kept spinning, and it became more and more scattered. Countless scattered lines outlined Li Kuangtu's figure, which looked more and more real. Yuan Lin was stunned, then stood up and said respectfully, "Your Highness." Li Kuangtu raised his head and looked at Yuan Lin quietly. After a while, he nodded slightly and said casually, "Sit down." Yuan Lin seemed to have adapted to the unusual way the two guests appeared, and slowly sat down. "It's not you who asked me out." Li Kuangtu glanced at Yuan Lin, and then his eyes fell on the cloud of starlight in front of him. It was a cloud of starlight that even he could not see through. "It's me who asked you out." In the cloud, His Majesty smiled sincerely. "I have a lobbyist, Your Highness. Since you are here, you might as well listen to what he has to say. The price offered by the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State is generally not low. If you can reach an agreement directly, I am willing to keep silent throughout." Li Kuangtu carefully examined His Majesty's figure. The sword chi was densely intertwined, forming an extremely blurry domain. Obviously, the other party was not his real body. It was a sword energy projection like him. Li Kuangtu looked at it quietly. For a moment, he did not know whether the other party did this out of caution or to show his strength in front of him. He was silent for a while, looked at Yuan Lin, and asked directly, "What does Chen Fongqing want to say?" "The Prime Minister hopes to have a deep cooperation with the Purgatory of Heaven capital," Yuan Lin said respectfully. Li Kuangtu moved. The sword energy projection suddenly became illusory, but his face became more and more real. For example, Yuan Lin could not adapt to the other party's straightforward rhythm. He could only bite the bullet and said, "The Prime Minister hopes that Your Highness can participate in the decisive battle in Beihai. At least for now, he has the same position as you. If you can make Emperor Dong's palace disappear, the Prime Minister is willing to give you a reward that you can't refuse." Li Kuangtu snorted softly and said calmly, "Be more detailed." "As long as Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai disappear, he can decide to give a part of the core industry of the Wang family of Beihai to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. At the same time, he will officially accept the Purgatory of Heaven capital back into Zhongzhou State and be responsible for the development of Tiannan." Yuan Lin took a deep breath and said calmly, "That is to say, if you can satisfy the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister will definitely satisfy you. In the absence of Emperor Dong's palace, Tiannan, including Xianyuan City, will belong to the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the future." "That sounds pretty good," Li Kuangtu said lightly. Yuan Lin took a puff of his cigar. In the light smoke, his voice was a little low. "The Prime Minister can do that." Li Kuangtu did not comment. Now Chen Fongqing's promise was undoubtedly a bit funny. However, if Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai disappeared, Chen Fongqing could indeed do that. Cooperating with Chen Fongqing meant joining the alliance of His Majesty in front of him. Li Kuangtu quickly thought about the pros and cons. He suddenly looked at His Majesty in front of him and asked, "Do you have anything to say?" "I only have one question," His Majesty said with a smile. "Now the whole dark world thinks that Li Tianlan will become the new chosen one. Your Highness, have you really seen or understood the ultimate state of the chosen one?" "The ultimate state of the chosen one." Li Kuangtu's pupils shrank slightly. Before he could speak, His Majesty had laughed. "You don't want to see it?" He smiled and said, I can guarantee that. So this is the reason for our cooperation this time. Divine Emperor of Nine Heavens. Chapter 905. Li Kuangtu quietly looked at His Majesty in front of him, and remained silent for 5 minutes. The extreme state of the Chosen One. For him, this was an extremely strange word. The Chosen One was the Chosen One. This was not a realm, so where did the extreme state come from? He took out a cigarette from his pocket and pulled out one. Yuan Lin subconsciously handed him a cigar with both hands. His Majesty's eyes narrowed a little playful. Yuan Lin might not realize anything, or he didn't understand. But His Majesty knew very well that the Li Kuangtu in front of him was a projection of sword energy, just like him at this time. A projection actually took out a cigarette from his pocket? He thought of Tribulation, who was superb in the shadow domain, and could even be said to be at the peak. It was rumored that Tribulation was Li Kuangtu's student at the beginning. That was to say, the Li Kuangtu in front of him had changed from the initial projection to the real body? It was a silent transformation. His Majesty didn't even notice it. Based on this alone, he could roughly judge the degree of Li Kuangtu's recovery. Was such a move a deterrent from the other party to him? Or a warning? Li Kuangtu waved his hand, stubbornly lit the cigarette in his hand, took a deep breath, and said in a low voice, "Extreme state." There was obvious doubt in his eyes. That's the extreme state. His Majesty nodded affirmatively. The most invincible person is in the most perfect state. The corners of Li Kuangtu's mouth twitched, and his eyes clearly said, "Don't talk nonsense with me." Thick smoke came out of his mouth, and his smile was a little playful. "I've been to Eastern Europe, but I didn't see you in Mormons." His meaning was obvious. In the past 100 years, it could even be said that after the ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan, the only one in the whole dark world who could be called the Chosen One was Wang Tianzong. This title was not a clear realm, but a powerful and invincible dominating power that could completely sweep everything. Wang Tianzong's performance in Mormons fully deserved this. He, Li Shi, and Lin Fengting were no match for Wang Tianzong together. Without the Eternal Sword, Li Kuangtu had reason to believe that Wang Tianzong in that state might not be a match for Wang Tianzong, even if he was besieged by a few more people, or even if all the experts at the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world attacked him together. Such an invincible realm was called the Chosen One, and Li Kuangtu recognized it. He had seen, faced, and battled the so-called geniuses. And this so-called His Majesty didn't even appear on the battlefield. Yet he was talking to him about the extreme state of the heavens' favorites. How ridiculous was that? His Majesty looked at Li Kuangtu and said with a smile, "I didn't go to Mormons." Li Kuangtu narrowed his eyes. He didn't know if the other party was telling the truth or not. He just said casually, "So? It's not important." His Majesty shook his head. "You and I both believe that as long as there is enough time, Li Tianlan will reach Wang Tianzong's state sooner or later. I don't know how much confidence you have in continuing to break through, but for me, the possibility of me reaching that level is not high. To say the least, even if I can reach that level, Wang Tianzong was far from reaching the limit of the Chosen One at that time. His strength may be enough, but his ruling power is far from enough." Li Kuangtu chuckled and said with a faint smile, "Then tell me, what do you think the limit state is? Or where have you seen it before?" His voice was cold. At this moment, he really felt that he had been ridiculed. In Mormons, he and Lin Fengting broke through to the peak of the invincible realm, and entered a new level. Together with Li Shi, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, they formed the most powerful fighting combination. But the trio was easily defeated by Wang Tianzong. And such a result, in His Majesty's eyes, was Wang Tianzong not ruling enough? Did he mean that Wang Tianzong was not strong enough? Or did he mean that he, Lin Fengting, and Li Shi were too trash at that time? His Majesty seemed to realize something. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "Sorry, no matter what you think, I don't mean to ridicule you. It's just that Wang Tianzong did not reach his limit state, and I haven't seen that state with my own eyes. Otherwise, I wouldn't be alive. But I can be sure that that state exists with a high probability, especially now. It's almost 100%. To be precise, if Wang Tianzong and the Chosen One reached the so-called limit state at that time, Yu Lixi and Lin Fengting didn't even have the chance to draw their swords. In that state, martial arts, thunder-shocking realm, invincible realm, peak of the invincible realm, or the so-called half-step chosen one, are all meaningless. They are all ordinary people, or rather, they are all non-entities. Li Guangtu raised the corners of his mouth, and his smile became more and more obvious. He nodded seriously and said sincerely, "Amazing, really amazing." "You don't believe it?" In the starlight clouds, His Majesty seemed to frown. "I believe it. Let me tell you a secret. The limit state can also be surpassed. The chosen one who surpasses the limit state can topple mountains and overturn seas. Do you believe it?" Li Guangtu laughed, but his voice did not contain the slightest hint of a smile. His indifferent eyes were full of disapproval. His Majesty waited until his laughter stopped, shook his head, and said lightly, "The 13th floor." Li Guangtu was stunned. His Majesty sneered. "Isn't the sword in the desert enough to explain the problem? That sword penetrated a distance of tens of thousands of meters in 1 second, no, in half a second. The air combat team, the armored core, the invincible realm, the murderous weapon, nothing could stop it. The 13th floor is a sword formation, and Xianyuan Feng is a murderous weapon. The murderous weapon is alive, yes, but without Li Tianlan's sword intent and sword energy. Do you think Xianyuan Feng can do this? Well, even if this doesn't explain anything, what about Mormon's sword? The master of Samsara Palace is at the peak of the invincible realm. Xianyuan Feng only had the eternal sword in her hands, which directly ended Wang Tianzong. Doesn't this explain the problem? What realm is Li Tianlan in now? What realm is the master of Samsara Palace? Why don't you think about it? If Xianyuan Feng in his heyday was in your hands, how much power could he exert? If Wang Tianzong didn't have the coldness of 9 states in his hands at that time, but Xianyuan Feng, what state would he be in? Li Guangtu suddenly fell silent. His face became extremely gloomy in an instant. This question, he really didn't seem to think about it. Mormon's eternal sword ended Wang Tianzong, and also led to the death of the master of Samsara Palace. Everyone thought that it was the master of Samsara Palace's desperate outburst, and the incredible sword formation of the 13-story tower. Almost no one thought that it was Xianyuan Feng's problem. No one mentioned this question after Wang Tianzong was ended, and the master of Samsara Palace died. It wasn't until the sword appeared in the desert the day before yesterday that people realized the nature of Xianyuan Feng. But immediately after Li Tianlan left the desert, the revenge of the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace came roaring. When the undercurrent of Zhongzhou state was surging, Li Tianlan appeared in Sai City again. The bloody storm directly swept through the 2 legions of Snow Country. People didn't have time to consider the specific problem of Xianyuan Feng, until His Majesty pointed it out in front of Li Guangtu. Extreme state. Li Guangtu took a deep breath and muttered to himself. Now there are still a few murderous weapons in the dark world that haven't integrated with Xianyuan Feng, and Li Tianlan hasn't entered the invincible realm. Even so, with Xianyuan Feng in his hand, do you have the confidence to win? When he officially reaches the level of Wang Tianzong, in the peak state, with the most complete and fully charged Xianyuan Feng in his hand, that's the extreme state of the chosen one. Do you think you have the chance to draw the sword? His Majesty's voice was faint. Li Guangtu held a cigarette and sat expressionlessly, motionless. In addition, I can guarantee that both the sword formation of the 13-story tower and Xianyuan Feng are very compatible with Li Tianlan. Well, it's the kind of compatibility that you can't imagine. One of the map of God of War of the Li family should focus on balance and physical strength, which means that Li Tianlan can enter the invincible realm faster. Not to mention the extreme state of the chosen one. It's hard for us to stop Li Tianlan at the peak of the invincible realm, unless we can take away his Xianyuan Feng. Is there a chance? Li Guangtu suddenly asked. Taking away Li Tianlan's Xianyuan Feng. This not only reduced the upper limit of Li Tianlan's combat capability, but also enhanced the strength of their own side. His Majesty's aura became deep in an instant. He was silent for a long time, then shook his head slightly and said quietly, "It's hard to say at the moment." He hesitated and seemed to be a little hesitant. Even if there is a chance, it's not very sure. The Xianyuan Feng taken away will also fall into the hands of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan will grow up very fast, but Wang Tianzong's injury is also unknown. Moreover, Xianyuan Feng has a complete consciousness. Such a sword, unless it is willing to betray Li Tianlan, we can't use it. Li Guangtu fell silent again. He was a little annoyed and lit another cigarette. Facing the current Li Tianlan and Xianyuan Feng, if you go all out, how sure are you to kill him? His Majesty suddenly asked. Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes and seemed to be thinking. After a while he said lightly, if it's a one-on-one fight, I'm not sure I can kill him, but if it's a one-on-one fight, I'm at least half sure. His tone was very calm. He was determined to kill Li Tianlan, and he was very eager. But if it was a one-on-one fight, he was really not sure that he could kill the current Li Tianlan. Therefore, he took a fancy to the upcoming final battle in Beihai. He wanted others to think that he was hiding in the dark when he was recovering from his injuries, and to make a sneak attack at the most critical moment. One fatal blow. Li Guangtu didn't care at all whether it was glorious or not. After he occupied Emperor Dong's palace and Tiannan, and created a new dynasty, who would remember the story of the loser? And it happened that Qin Fangqing also wanted to cooperate with him. Li Guangtu didn't agree, but he didn't have any reason to refuse. The key was how many benefits or valuable promises he could get. His appearance here had already shown his attitude, and he believed that His Majesty and Yuan Lin beside him were clear about this. How sure are you? Li Guangtu's tone was low, and he stared at His Majesty in the clouds. The starlight cloud around the other party was a domain that was condensed to the extreme. In terms of martial arts level alone, Li Guangtu could be sure that the other party's martial arts level also surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, and stood at the same level as him. This shocked Li Guangtu secretly, and he was also a little vigilant. Even if the final battle in Beihai would go smoothly and get the result he wanted, there would also be obstacles on his way in the future. Not to mention Wang Tianzong, whose state was unknown. The mysterious His Majesty in front of him was destined to be a big threat in front of him. However, the other party's state seemed a little strange. The other party's realm was there, but his aura was extremely unstable. For a moment, Li Guangtu couldn't determine the other party's true combat strength. I'm not sure at all. Li Tianlan has Xianyuan Feng, and I'm no match for him at all. But I can barely protect myself. In the clouds, His Majesty's laughter was very sincere. Li Guangtu couldn't be sure whether it was true or not, so he could only take it as a lie. The current situation is very clear. Li Tianlan has become very dangerous. Time is always on his side. We don't have time. We can't even wait for a year now, let alone 10 years. Li Tianlan's state is perfect in all aspects. This may cause him some trouble, but as his martial arts and body are balanced, he will soon enter the invincible realm. The best way is to kill this huge threat in advance. This final battle in Beihai is a good opportunity, even the best one. His Majesty's tone became serious. Neither of us is sure to deal with Li Tianlan with Xianyuan Feng, but if you and I work together, we are almost 100% sure to kill him. Now the situation in Zhongzhou state is complicated. If Li Tianlan dies, it will be good for everyone. Prime Minister Qin Fangqing can get out of trouble. As for you and me, he laughed. As long as we win the final battle, Tiannan will belong to you, and Kunlun City will belong to me. The city belongs to me. This is the best outcome. Tiannan will belong to you. This sentence directly stabbed into Li Guangtu's heart. He thought of the castle that was like a mountain. He thought of the big and exaggerated fountain square. He thought of the whole Xianyuan city that was like a huge construction site. He thought of the city in the air club at this moment. He thought of the tens of thousands of square kilometers of Tiannan. What Lu Dehai's research group could collect, so could the Purgatory of Heaven capital. It might not be so detailed, but it was enough for Li Guangtu to know what Xianyuan city meant. Those things that made them jealous, envious, afraid, and fearful. Everything was what Li Guangtu wanted the most. Even in his dreams. Li Guangtu took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes, and glanced at Yuan Lin, the first deputy director of the Cabinet General Office, who had been silent, finally found an opportunity. He subconsciously straightened up and said with a smile, "Your Highness, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I can promise the Purgatory of Heaven capital that as long as there is no Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State will fully support the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In fact, this is not only a promise, but also a practical need. We can't let the dark world of Zhongzhou State fall into chaos and become a masterless area infiltrated by various forces. Without Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai, we must find a new guardian. Your Highness, you used to be the god of war of Zhongzhou State. For us, you are the most suitable candidate. The god of war of Zhongzhou State is not me. Li Kuangtu twitched the corner of his mouth. Perhaps many years ago, he was the god of war of Zhongzhou State in many people's hearts. But he had never sat in that position. At that time, the god of war of Zhongzhou State was his father, Li Honghe. He was just the commander of the Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State, the first commander of the army. Yuan Lin's smile stiffened, and then he changed the topic awkwardly. He forced a smile and said, Your Highness, you should know that even the Prime Minister needs support. We are very sincere. Li Kuangtu nodded and looked at His Majesty. Me and him? You and I can coexist. His Majesty said with a smile in his voice, We must also coexist. This is a plan that everyone, including Li Huaqing, can accept. Because of balance. Li Kuangtu leaned back, and his whole body sank into the sofa. Is this also the reason why Li Huaqing quit? Yes, because of balance. His Majesty nodded. We don't comment on the termination plan. But after the termination plan was exposed, the reason why Li Huaqing could quit decisively was that he didn't want to damage the overall interests of Zhongzhou State because of the game, but he had other choices, which is also very important. The so-called choice is the Lin clan's participation. If the Lin clan replaces Kunlun City, it can reach a relatively stable balance with Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. In this case, even if Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace cannot be solved for the time being, the ruler of Zhongzhou State can take advantage of this balance to better control the current situation. If the Lin clan doesn't replace Kunlun City, then Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace may compete with each other in the future. But once their positions are threatened, they will cooperate with each other, one in the south and one in the north, to resist the pressure of Zhongzhou State. The Lin clan, which has connections with both Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai, can completely coordinate this problem with its own advantages. If not for this, even if Li Huaqing knows about the termination plan, he can only bite the bullet and go on without a way out. So in Li Huaqing's heart, neither Beihai nor Emperor Dong's palace is the most important. What matters is balance. Li Huaqing can completely accept the destruction of Emperor Dong's palace and Beihai. He is the president, and his most basic requirement is stability. If stability can make the future of Zhongzhou State better, he will definitely accept it. Your Highness, there is no grudge between you and me. If we replace Kunlun City and Emperor Dong's palace respectively, we can also reach a new balance. Compared with the uncontrollable Li Tianlan and the profound Wang family of Beihai in the future, our existence is more acceptable to Zhongzhou State. Li Kuangtu was silent for a while. He looked at Yuan Lin and suddenly asked, What exactly do you need me to do? 2 aspects. Yuan Lin narrowed his eyes and chuckled. First, the Prime Minister hopes that you can transfer the elite forces of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to Beihai, go all out to win, kill Li Tianlan, and completely destroy Mount Dibing. Second, during the decisive battle in Beihai, the Prime Minister hopes that the Purgatory of Heaven capital can destroy Emperor Dong's palace and occupy Xianyuan City as soon as possible. I can go to Beihai by myself. Li Kuangtu frowned. This is not a suitable choice. Yuan Lin said cautiously, Li Tianlan, Situt Songyue, Wei Kunlun Flaming Fire, Sai City Mount Shu, and a large number of elites of the Dark Knights. Although Emperor Dong's palace suffered heavy losses in the desert, Li Tianlan can still mobilize a lot of forces, which is not easy to deal with. His Majesty's sword chi projection shook slightly. Li Kuangtu frowned and looked at Yuan Lin. Do you need me to analyze the situation in Northern Europe with you? Li Kuangtu said lightly, or do you have no confidence in the Jiang family of South America and the Vatican? The forces of the Jiang family of South America and the Vatican are restraining the Dark Knights in Northern Europe, and Flaming Fire is unable to take care of them. As for Situd Sungyue and Wei Kunlun, they are from Zhongzhou State after all. Can't the Prime Minister even restrain them? Under normal circumstances, we can do it. Yuan Lin narrowed his eyes and said with a smile. But if Li Tianlan loses his mind, we can't guarantee that we won't fall out with Sai City and Mount Shu. At that time, he will gather all the forces he can and kill in the decisive battle regardless of the consequences. Lose his mind? Li Guangtu subconsciously changed his posture. He leaned more comfortably on the sofa and asked slowly, why would Li Tianlan lose his mind? Because of the termination plan. Yuan Lin said quietly, now we can't give up the termination plan. His voice was calm and cold. Wang Yuetong is about to die. Chapter 906. It was not the first time for Li Tianlan to come to Tiannan, but it was the first time for him to come to Xianyuan City. The helicopter that took off from Yuzhou flew all the way over Nanyuan, Ningbian where the Freedom Corps was located, and went straight into Xianyuan City. This city was named by Li Tianlan, but it had been developing rapidly for 2 years outside of his sight. The rotors of the helicopter roared and rotated in the air. Standing in front of the cabin and looking down, Li Tianlan could clearly see the basically completed city center, the construction of several other districts, and the demolition of almost the entire city. Construction companies from all over Zhongzhou State were working hard, and all kinds of construction equipment covered the whole field of vision. Li Tianlan looked at it quietly. His deep and serene pupils shone with a strange brilliance. I like it here. Qin Weibai leaned against Li Tianlan and said with a soft smile, such a Xianyuan city was like a piece of white paper. Every construction company, every construction machine, every transport vehicle, and every worker was the brush and ink on the white paper. Everyone and all their efforts were trying to draw the most perfect pattern on this white paper. The current Xianyuan city could not be said to be beautiful. Its downtown area might be luxurious enough, but compared with the ruins in most areas, this kind of luxury was extremely abrupt. But this kind of city that was changing every day was enough to make people feel relaxed and happy. The sunlight shone through the cabin on Qin Weibai. She gently held Li Tianlan's arm, and there was unconcealable longing and happiness on her perfect and flawless face. Li Tianlan looked at the city below quietly. After a long time, he nodded seriously. How do you feel? Bai Qingzhao, who came to Xianyuan City with Li Tianlan, asked with a smile. It was not the first time for him to come to Xianyuan City. He was the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, and one of the most important tasks was to grasp the detailed movements of the Tiannan Freedom Corps. The headquarters of the Freedom Corps was in Ningbian. In the past 2 years, Bai Qingzhao would come here almost every month, and he would also come to Xianyuan City to take a look. It was no exaggeration to say that every change in Xianyuan City was under his sight and attention. Li Tianlan was quiet for a moment and whispered, I'm overwhelmed with emotions. Only these words could clearly express his feelings at this time. This was the first time for him to see his own city, his own country. The glorious future that countless people had been looking forward to was no longer an illusion. Instead, it had become incomparably real here. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan truly felt the power. It didn't belong to martial arts, but it was his power. It was a power that could carry him to the peak. This place will definitely become the most beautiful city in Zhongzhou State in the future, just like Shenzhou City before. It's a product of a special background. It's hard to replicate and can't be replicated. Bai Qingzhao sighed with emotion. Emperor Dong's palace is now worthy of Xianyuan City, and Xianyuan City is also worthy of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. In the distance, there was a sparkling pool of water. Looking down from the sky, Xianyuan City was almost divided into 2 parts by an artificial lake, which was not very vast but had a great atmosphere. Numerous uniquely shaped arch bridges connected the 2 sides of the artificial lake. The lake water was flowing gently, surrounding a mountain-like castle. The surroundings of the castle were oppressive and quiet, and it revealed an indescribable solemnity. Li Tianlan fell silent. Qin Weibai and Bai Qingzhao also fell silent. Surrounded by the lake, Emperor Dong's palace was like an island in Xianyuan City. At this moment, countless people on the island stood around the castle. The simple and heavy black and white color covered the bright flowers and green grass around the castle. White banners fluttered around the island. The area on the left behind the castle had been separated and turned into a huge morning hall. Everyone in Emperor Dong's palace stood outside the castle, waiting for something silently. Li Tianlan pressed his lips tightly, and his eyes were deep and firm. The reason why he gave Hui Nam was also because of this matter. More than 1,000 soldiers of the Nightmare Troop who died in the desert would be buried tomorrow. As the palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan had to be here. Nothing was more important than this matter. The helicopter landed slowly on the tarmac of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan took Qin Weibai's hand and walked out of the cabin. His expression was calm and steady. In his sight were the members of Emperor Dong's palace, dressed in black formal suits with white armbands on their arms. The senior members of Emperor Dong's palace he was familiar with were all gathered together. Most of them were people Li Tianlan found familiar, or had never seen before. But they were all members of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. Before he could say anything in his sight, the dense crowd bowed slightly at the same time and said in a uniform voice, "Welcome back, Your Majesty." The neat and loud voice echoed over Emperor Dong's palace, and the sound waves were extremely intense. "Your Majesty. Welcome back, Your Majesty." Li Tianlan subconsciously straightened his body. He looked deeply at the crowd around him and didn't speak for a long time. 2 years in the desert prison. Emperor Dong's palace grew from nothing. Xianyuan City grew from nothing. Li Tianlan had too many things to do. For example, to meet the new high-level and quasi-high-level figures of Emperor Dong's palace in the past 2 years. To meet the chief administrator and chief judge of Xianyuan City. For example, to let everyone in Emperor Dong's palace understand the purpose of Bai Qingzhao's visit, many things. But he did none of them. Under everyone's gaze he nodded slowly and said calmly, "Go to the morning hall." His voice rang in the ears of every member of Emperor Dong's palace. The crowd automatically parted. Ning Qianqing, the first mayor of Xianyuan City, came over and said softly, "I'll take you there." Li Tianlan shook his head, pointed to Bai Qingzhao beside him, and said slowly, "Qianqing, this is Secretary General Bai of the Army Headquarters. On behalf of the Army Headquarters and Minister Dongcheng, I'm here to express my condolences to the families of the martyrs. Arrange for the Secretary General to meet the families of the martyrs first. Don't be afraid of trouble. This is something that must be done. Take me to the morning hall during the day, and I'll be there soon. Do the families of the martyrs have any requests? Zhongzhou State will give them some compensation, but Emperor Dong's palace also needs to give them enough compensation and pension." Ning Qianqing nodded and then shook his head. The families didn't make any requests. Li Tianlan was silent. What was the use of making requests? They were all gone. But they were all gone. If they didn't want compensation, what else could they ask for? He took a deep breath and patted Ning Qianqing on the shoulder. "You go with the Secretary General first, I'll come later." Ning Qianqing nodded and shook hands with Bai Qingzhao solemnly. Li Beitian, who was a little weak but still in good spirits, came to Li Tianlan and said in a low voice, "The morning hall is behind the castle. The location of the cemetery was decided 2 years ago. We used this artificial lake and circled a small island not far from the castle. There is enough space. In the future, the graves of Senior Li and the seniors of the Li family can also be moved here. I mentioned this to you when you were in the desert, and I'm waiting for your decision." Li Tianlan nodded and suddenly said, "Why do we circle an island? There are many places near the castle." The corner of Li Baiqian's mouth moved as if he wanted to explain something. Finally, he shook his head and said softly, "We've invited a feng shui master. The location of the cemetery is the best in terms of feng shui." Li Tianlan was silent for a while and nodded. He took Qin Weibai's hand and said softly, "Let's go and have a look. I was supposed to write a big chapter today. I had a stiff neck last night and it hurt so much. I'll see how I feel tomorrow. If it doesn't hurt, I'll write a big chapter." Chapter 907. The sun was setting. After dinner, Huang Tong walked quietly on the huge and empty training ground, looking around with empty eyes. There were still a few soldiers training on the training ground, and they all looked listless. Not far away, two companies were gathering, but their slogans were weak. Huang Tong watched all this quietly, and his eyes became more and more empty. The news has spread, and now the response from the middle and grassroots is very strong. General, I can't control the situation in the regiment. If possible, I hope the higher-ups can give me some support. A tall middle-aged man in his 40s followed Huang Tong carefully, and his voice was a little bitter. Huang Tong walked forward silently, like a walking corpse, and did not speak for a long time. He was now at the encampment of an infantry regiment in the Beijiang military region. The regiment commander was a middle-level officer he valued very much. He was capable and educated. If there were no accidents, Huang Tong intended to promote him to a higher level. In a situation where the entire northern borderline was in a state of panic, Huang Tong had high hopes for this regiment, the regiment leader. Therefore, the first stop of his inspection was here. In fact, it proved that this infantry regiment codenamed War Tiger still maintained a certain military atmosphere. At least one or two figures could be seen on the training ground occasionally. Compared to other places, this was already good. In one day, to be exact, in the past less than 12 hours, the order of the Beijiang Corps had completely collapsed. The Desert War had ended for nearly 2 days. In the past day, the morale of the generals and soldiers in Beijiang was low. What completely collapsed the order of the entire corps was a piece of news. Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, went to Tiannan with Li Tianlan, the Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's palace. They went to pay their respects to the victims and the families of the victims. This was the attitude of the Army Headquarters. The moment the Beijiang Corps received the news, it completely collapsed. The Desert War was the war between the Corps and Emperor Dong's palace. Many people died in Emperor Dong's palace. But even more people died in the Corps. Such large-scale casualties were extremely rare since the founding of the People's Republic. Under normal circumstances, as soon as the war ended, they should be able to see the big shots from Yuzhou and hear their promises. Then what awaited them was the mourning of the whole country. They should be heroes remembered by Zhongzhou State. This was inevitable, and there would be no exceptions. But the so-called inevitable did not happen. Until the end of the war, Zhongzhou State had no attitude at all. They seemed to have completely forgotten about the Northern Border Army. A large number of corpses were left in the desert. Zhongzhou State didn't care about it. There was no comfort and promise from the big shots, and there was no mourning. Not to mention it in the news, there was no reason for it to exist. And the most representative of Dongqing Wudi in the army headquarters had gone to Tiannan. The corpses that had not been cleaned up in the desert seemed to have died just like that, without any explanation. There was not even any news about the pension that would soon be paid. The entire Northern Border Army was dead silent. Compared to blaming Zhongzhou State, the endless resentment was all concentrated on Huang Tong, the head of the Beijiang Army. Without any orders from the military headquarters, he insisted on mobilizing most of the Northern Frontier Army's combat power. It was clearly a war, but the situation reported to the military headquarters was a drill. During the critical period, he even cut off the army's contact with the outside world. All of this showed that the war was Huang Tong's personal decision. At least it was not recognized by Zhongzhou State on the surface. It was all Huang Tong's fault that the bigwigs of Zhongzhou State did not come. Everyone could see this. Therefore, when Zhongzhou State turned a deaf ear to everything here, the ordinary soldiers and the middle and grassroots officers of the army were extremely disappointed with Huang Tong. The ordinary soldiers stopped training. The grassroots officers didn't care. The order of the army was issued to the middle-level officers. The middle-level officers just made a phone call to deal with it, and then reported to their superiors that they couldn't handle it. In various companies and regiments, countless soldiers' applications for reinstatement increased wildly. Some middle-level and high-level officers had already submitted their transfer applications. They could be transferred anywhere as long as they were not under Huang Tong's command. The higher-ups of the army were gloomy, and the deputy of the army distanced himself from Huang Tong as soon as possible. All kinds of reports flew to the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State like snowflakes. The order had been completely out of control. Huang Tong wanted to interfere, but he was powerless to do so. From the standpoint of the army headquarters, what Huang Tong did was completely treason. But after getting Chen Fangqing's support, the war he started was hard to define. But Dongqing Wudi was not without a temper. For what Huang Tong had done, it was good enough that he was not arrested on the spot after the war. It was simply a pipe dream to ask the army headquarters to pay for what Huang Tong had done. For Huang Tong, this was really the end of the road. Now his only hope was Chen Fangqing. Although he knew that Chen Fangqing's situation was not much better, Huang Tong had no other backers. I will communicate with the army headquarters, Huang Tong said slowly. Hold on for a few more days. I will definitely give you an explanation about Beijiang. The regimental commander nodded with a bitter face and said helplessly, I'll try my best, but, General, this matter needs to be done as soon as possible, especially in terms of pension. If it is not in place for a long time, the families will not agree. Zhongzhou State had always been the fastest in terms of pension. In most cases, the notice and pension were basically in place at the same time. If this point was not implemented as soon as possible, it was very likely to cause a worse impact. The corner of Huang Tong's mouth twitched slightly. He nodded expressionlessly and said, I see. He walked slowly to his car and said flatly, You do more work and put more effort into the affairs of the regiment. Leave the pension to me. The regimental commander nodded and said respectfully, I understand. Huang Tong nodded, opened the door and got into the car. The car started slowly and left the Fighting Tiger Regiment. The phone rang in the silent car. Huang Tong took out his phone and glanced at it blankly. It was his secretary. He frowned slightly, pressed the answer button and said in a low voice, What's the matter? General. On the other end of the phone, the secretary, who had been with Huang Tong for several years, said with trepidation, The army headquarters. There is news from the army headquarters. It's. Huang Tong's heart tightened slightly. He narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, What news? The army headquarters. The secretary took a deep breath and said, The army headquarters. Minister Dongqing sent a document. Huang Tong could clearly feel the secretary's embarrassment and fear. He frowned tightly and waited patiently. Minister Dongqing approved the maneuver plan of the Beijiang Corps. Maneuver plan? Before the Desert War, the reason Huang Tong reported to the army headquarters was that the Beijiang Corps was going to conduct a maneuver in the desert. No one believed this reason. But it was at least a reason. And this bullshit reason. Dongqing Wudi approved it. Huang Tong gritted his teeth, his face twisted and ferocious. He could understand what Dongqing Wudi meant. Dongqing Wudi approved the maneuver of the Beijiang military region. He also casually defined the Desert War as a maneuver. So in the eyes of the army headquarters, everything that happened in the Desert War, and the loss of the Beijiang Corps, none of this happened at all. Naturally, there was no clear statement, let alone the so-called pension. Because it was just a maneuver. Huang Tong gritted his teeth. He thought of Bai Qingzhao, who followed Li Tianlan to Tiannan, of everything in the Beijiang Corps, of his situation and his next fate. The corner of his mouth moved. Puff. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth and sprayed into the carriage. General. The driver was startled. As the steering wheel tilted, the black car suddenly shook on the street. It's okay. Huang Tong slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His face was pale, and he said gloomily, Drive. He silently hung up the phone and kept muttering to himself, Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi. The phone rang again. Huang Tong, who was desperate, slowly lowered his head and looked at the phone screen. He was slightly stunned and subconsciously narrowed his eyes. On the phone screen was not a phone number, but a name recorded in the address book. Jiang Shan. Chapter 908. Strictly speaking, the relationship between Huang Tong and Jiang Shan was very ordinary. One of them was the chairman of Beijiang, and the other was the commander of the Beijiang Corps. Although they met a lot on weekdays, they basically maintained a superficial harmony. Jiang Shan was a senior counselor in Zhongzhou State. To some extent, he could be regarded as one of the leaders of the Prince Group. But as his old leader gradually left the senior management of the Prince Group, his position also changed subtly. Of course, in the general direction, Jiang Shan could often be in line with the group. But in many cases, some of Jiang Shan's actions seemed to indicate that he had some other ideas. In the prince group, Jiang Shan, the counselor, seemed to always maintain a vague boundary with other leaders. This boundary gradually became a barrier, and the barrier gradually expanded, and finally reached its peak a few years ago. In the last election, the prince group originally wanted to promote Jiang Shan to become a director of Zhongzhou state. That meant that he would become the flag figure of the prince group and cooperate with Chen Fangqing to control the future direction of the prince group. From counselor to director, the promotion might be the pursuit of most counselors. Although there was a barrier between Jiang Shan and the prince group, they could barely maintain the same general direction. Moreover, after he became a director, Chen Fangqing would keep an eye on him, so there would be no big trouble. Once Jiang Shan became a director, he would inevitably leave Beijiang, and the prince group could take advantage of the situation to firmly hold Beijiang in the hands of trustworthy people. Jiang Shan worked as a director for one term and retired honorably, which was a happy ending for everyone. However, Jiang Shan refused the proposal of the prince group, and it was a very clear refusal, leaving no room for negotiation. He did not choose to become a director to promote his rank, but continued to stay in Beijiang. In order to resist the internal pressure of the prince group, Jiang Shan made a lot of big moves in Beijiang. 2 directors of Beijiang, who could be said to be the confidants of the prince group, were directly removed. The system of Beijiang was constantly changing, and Jiang Shan, who did not hide anything, directly widened the gap. In a short time, with his prestige, Beijiang almost became his private kingdom, and it was tightly managed. As a last resort, the prince group could only continue to let Guo Wentian take the position of director, and at the same time, find a way to take over Jiang Shan. Jiang Shan was also working. At first, he wanted to unite with the Wang family of Beihai by marriage, and let Jiang Shangyu marry Wang Yuetong. If Wang Yuetong married Jiang Shangyu, it could be said to be a real marriage of lower status. But if he used Beijiang and a counselor as bargaining chips, it was not unacceptable. Jiang Shan had enough confidence to propose marriage, but Wang Tianzong refused his proposal. In desperation, Jiang Shan could only retreat and began to flirt with the Special Warfare Group. Gu Xingyan was naturally very welcoming of Jiang Shan. The Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group had also gradually drifted apart in recent years. There would be no psychological burden for him to accept Jiang Shan. After Gu Xingyan vaguely expressed his support for Jiang Shan finally became stable in Beijiang. His current situation was a bit delicate. Although he was still a member of the Prince Group, he also had the support of the Special Warfare Group. When they did not have absolute confidence to take him down, the Prince Group was not very willing to touch him, but no one would really treat him as one of their own. In this situation, the relationship between Huang Tong and Jiang Shan was naturally not good. Every time they met or talked, Huang Tong always maintained a certain degree of vigilance and defense. The phone kept ringing. Huang Tong looked down at his phone and hesitated for a moment before pressing the answer button. He somewhat despised Jiang Shan's slippery ways, but he would not deny the other party's upbringing. At the very least, he was sure that Jiang Shan didn't call to mock him. "Chairman, I'm Huang Tong." The call connected, and Huang Tong's indifferent voice sounded from the back seat of the car. On the other end of the line, Jiang Shan chuckled. "Old Huang, Secretary General Bai has gone to Tiannan. Have you received the news?" Huang Tong's face darkened as he gritted his teeth and snorted. "You're in a very bad situation right now. I don't need to say more. I'm sure you know that yourself." Jiang Shan's voice was calm. "What are you trying to say?" Huang Tong frowned, his tone cold. "The Northern Borderline Army cannot go out of control. I am the Northern Borderline's chairman. I am responsible for everything that happens in the Northern Borderline, including the Northern Borderline Army." Jiang Shamping said indifferently. Huang Tong pondered for a moment, and a sneer gradually appeared on the corner of his mouth. If there was no reasonable solution for the tens of thousands of dead in the Beijiang army, the whole Beijiang would fall into chaos. The families of the tens of thousands of dead would gather in Beijiang, which would even lead to a series of huge social problems. As the speaker of Beijiang, Jiang Shan could hardly absolve himself from the blame. Once that happened, Huang Tong was bound to fall. But he was only a lieutenant general, and his weight was far from enough. The prince group would inevitably take advantage of this opportunity to take over Jiang Shan and replace him with a real member of their own. Therefore, Jiang Shan's phone call seemed to explain his attitude. He was afraid. Huang Tong suddenly relaxed and seemed to find some comfort in his heart. His laughter was a little sarcastic. No one is willing to let the Beijiang army go out of control. I am the first person responsible for this matter. It's not good for me if the army goes out of control. But what can I do now? I just received a notice from the army headquarters. The army headquarters has agreed to the maneuver of the Beijiang military region in the desert. And then there's no then. What can I do? If the pension problem of tens of thousands of people can't be solved, the Beijiang army will exist in name only. The army headquarters, the army headquarters. His voice became louder and louder, and finally turned into a roar to vent his anger. But in the end his voice gradually lowered, becoming resentful and desperate. You reported the maneuver to the army headquarters, and the army headquarters gave you a clear response. There's no problem in any aspect. Jiang Shan said slowly. But the actual situation is not like this. Huang Tong growled in a low voice and said in a suppressed voice, I don't believe that the army headquarters will ignore the Beijiang army. The life and death of tens of thousands of people is a huge social problem. They can't ignore it. I'm afraid you're afraid, but isn't Dongqing Wudi afraid? Is it possible? Impossible. Jiang Shan said lightly. In the end, the army headquarters will definitely intervene in this matter, and the pension will be issued, but that will be after you are completely torn apart by the soldiers of the Beijiang army and the families of the deceased, and after the prince group has suffered a major blow. Old Huang, there is no hope for you. Losing your reputation is a light punishment. In the current situation, before the army headquarters intervenes, your only end is to die without a burial place. Huang Tong gritted his teeth. His face was a little pale, and there was obvious fear in his eyes. The most frightening thing was often the truth. He knew that what Jiang Shan said was true. He couldn't refute the truth at all. Do you want to live? Feeling Huang Tong's silence, Jiang Shan suddenly laughed. His laughter was extremely low, with an indescribable temptation. Take your family and go far away. Live a good life. Take your family away and live a good life. You can get a sum of money that you can't spend in this life. Take the money and your family away before you are smashed into pieces. How about that? Huang Tong suddenly shivered. At this moment, listening to Jiang Shan's voice, he suddenly felt a little numb. What do you mean? It's very simple. Old Huang, it's your best chance to get out now. I can provide you with a sum of money, 9 figures, which is enough for you to squander for a lifetime. You can take your family abroad, Italos, East Island, or South America. You can choose. I'll arrange it as long as you let go of everything in the Beijiang army. In fact, the Beijiang army doesn't belong to you anymore, does it? Then what do I need to pay? Huang Tong forced himself to calm down, but he couldn't calm down no matter how hard he tried. You hardly need to pay anything. Jiang Shan's laughter became deeper and deeper. As long as you listen to me completely, I can give you everything I just promised. Huang Tong held the phone stiffly and was silent for a long time. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said in a dry voice, You want the whole Beijiang? On the other end of the phone, Jiang Shan laughed. He suddenly thought of what Jiang Shangyu said on the phone with his son a few hours ago. He said the original words, Li Tianlan can get the whole Tiannan. Why can't we get Beijiang? Chapter 909. Jiang Shan's voice was very calm. That was the determination of seizing the opportunity and making up his mind after enduring for a long time. It was a kind of majestic power that Huang Tong could completely feel. Li Tianlan could get Tiannan. Why can't we get Beijiang? Huang Tong's brain was buzzing. He carefully tasted this sentence and said in a hoarse voice, I can't arrange so many things alone, especially the life of you and your family abroad in the future. Jiang Shan said faintly, 9 figures of money, the life of a rich man in East Island, Italos, South America. All these meant that Jiang Shan had a lot of available resources in his hands. Whether these resources were his or not, he could use them and made a promise, which was enough to explain a lot of problems. Huang Tong's breathing was a little short. I don't understand. What are you still hesitating about? Jiang Shan's voice was very indifferent. But every word he said and every word was with the taste of naked ambition in Huang Tong's ears. The kind of wild ambition that was no longer hidden and completely exposed. What do I need to do? Huang Tong shook his head fiercely and said in a deep voice. As Jiang Shan said, he really had nothing to hesitate about. He was already at the end of his rope and had no choice. He would either die or spend the rest of his life in the desert prison. After offending Li Tianlan, his own family was doomed to be extremely miserable. And Lin Yuxian had already said that he would kill his whole family within a week. What else could he hesitate about? The hope that Chen Fangqing gave him was indeed too small. So small that it could be ignored. First of all, you have to cooperate with Xiaoqing. Jiang Shan's voice was a little hoarse, with a touch of faint joy. Xiaoqing? Huang Tong was stunned and frowned. Young Xiaoqing? Jiang Shan said faintly. Huang Tong took a deep breath and smiled self-mockingly. Yang Xiaoqing was the Northern Borderline Legion's Deputy Legion Commander. He was Huang Tong's main assistant, but among the 3 Deputy Legion commanders he was ranked last. His ability was also extremely average, and he was in charge of unimportant tasks such as logistics and health. But no matter what, Yang Xiaoqing was indeed the main leader of the Northern Borderline Legion. Huang Tong did not expect Jiang Shan to quietly extend his hand into the Northern Borderline Legion, and even place a big nail by his side. Cooperate with Yang Xiaoqing. Did Jiang Shan intend to use Yang Xiaoqing to control Beijiang Corps? Why him? Huang Tong asked. His ability is average, his prestige is average, and his experience is average. I can't see any good points about him. His greatest strength is that he's obedient. Jiang Shan chuckled. Absolutely obedient. Huang Tong remained silent. Be obedient for the current needs of Jiang Shan. This was indeed the greatest advantage. How should I cooperate? Huang Tong asked lightly. His heart did not waver. He did not want to be involved in the Northern Borderline Army and the Prince Group. He just wanted to escape. First of all, you have to make a deep self-examination. The army headquarters is watching everything about the Beijiang Corps. Dongqing Wudi will not express his position in a short time. When the time is right, I will ask the financial department of Beijiang to send the pension to the Beijiang Corps. At that time, the only thing you need to do is to cooperate with the publicity of the financial department of Beijiang and resign afterward. I will arrange for you to leave Zhongzhou State as soon as possible. Jiang Shan said concisely. Huang Tong had fully understood what Jiang Shan wanted. What he wanted was a complete Beijiang. He wanted to grasp the personnel power, the administrative power, and the most sensitive military power. This was the largest province of Zhongzhou State, with a total area of more than 1/6 of the whole Zhongzhou State. Although the environment was a little bad, if he could really grasp it, Beijiang was definitely a promising place. But the problem was how to grasp Jiang Shan. Huang Tong felt a little ridiculous and said subconsciously, "Do you really think you can grasp Beijiang tightly?" Once Jiang Shan's ambition was exposed, he would face not only the Prince Group but the whole Zhongzhou State. Beijiang could not be separated. Even if Jiang Shan controlled everything in Beijiang, it was impossible. Without strength he was not qualified. When Zhongzhou State issued a transfer order, some of Jiang Shan's trusted subordinates would be transferred away, or even directly. Jiang Shan would have little means to resist. A powerful provincial speaker, who also served as a counselor, was enough to make several groups in Zhongzhou State join hands to deal with him. He did not believe that Jiang Shan could not think of this. I have my own way. Jiang Shan remained calm. Split. Huang Tong narrowed his eyes. It's cooperation and balance. Jiang Shan laughed. At that time someone will support me. Dongqing Wudi and even the president may support me. But this is not what you should pay attention to. Next, you should cooperate with Xiaoqing. Huang Tong fell silent. He had no interest in the future of Beijiang. What he wanted most now was a way out. He changed his posture and said slowly, "Why should I believe you? After I do all this, I can leave Zhongzhou State and even live the kind of life you said? I can arrange for your family to leave first." Jiang Shan said flatly. If it's not enough, Huang Tong directly interrupted Jiang Shan with a sneer. Arrange for my family? Or do you want to threaten me with my family? Jiang Shan chuckled and said directly, I don't have to lie to you. You can also tell me directly what you want or what you want. There are many plans, and we can talk about them. Huang Tong was silent. Jiang Shan waited patiently for a while, and chuckled again. It seems that you need to think about it. Huang Tong still did not speak. Jiang Shan's tone became softer and softer. I respect your choice, but you must know that your time is running out. He chuckled and silently hung up the phone. Huang Tong sat in the car with a livid face, looking out of the window at the scenery that kept retreating. His expression was a little tangled and struggling. He had a lot of things to worry about. For example, was Jiang Shan trustworthy? For example, was the channel arranged by Jiang Shan safe? If everything was certain, would the so-called safe place become a different kind of cage? He would be controlled by Jiang Shan all the time, and sometimes even become a bargaining chip? Even if this was not the case, Zhongzhou State had always been persistent in hunting down traitors. Would his family be found? Huang Tong really did not want to leave Zhongzhou State, unless it was a last resort. However, to find Chen Fangqing? How sure was he that he could protect himself? Huang Tong suddenly shook his head. He held the phone, and seemed to be wondering whether to call Chen Fangqing again. The phone rang again. Huang Tong's arm trembled and he answered the phone again. This time, the secretary on the other end of the phone was more careful. She reported the situation of Haoyue Group in a voice as light as a mosquito's hum. Huang Tong's face gradually turned livid, eventually pale, and then slowly became determined. December 5th. The morning of the second day after his arrival in Tiannan. After a short period of preparation, countless news about Haoyue Group were exposed by a large number of media almost at the same time. This behemoth with a market value of hundreds of billions was deeply rooted in various fields of Zhongzhou State. In its violent turmoil, all kinds of news were overwhelming in the eyes of everyone in Zhongzhou State. Tax evasion, power for money transactions, driving up prices, forced demolition, murder, suppressing competitors by illegal means, and embezzling public property in collaboration with some big shots. Haoyue Group was too big and involved too many fields. When all the news was exposed at the same time, the whole Haoyue Group was like a dirty black nest. Many decisions might not come from the senior management of Haoyue Group, but the decisions of its branches. However, with the death of the chairman of Haoyue Group, all the crimes were pointed at, intentionally or unintentionally. The dead chairman. To be more precise, it was pointed directly at Chen Fangqing. Overnight, more than 40 officials in 5 provinces of Zhongzhou State were strictly controlled. Among them, Southwest City and Tianfu Province became the hardest-hit areas. Numerous partners of the Haoyue Group terminated their cooperation with the Haoyue Group. The Flourishing Age Fund took action immediately. A large amount of funds poured into the stock market, and crazily suppressed the stocks of the listed companies of Haoyue Group. It was all as if it had been prepared in advance. Before everyone could react, the shaky Haoyue Group was close to collapse. In one morning, nearly 20% of the shares of Haoyue Group had fallen into the hands of the Flourishing Age Fund. All the forces that followed the activities of the Flourishing Age Fund had different degrees of gains. The stock price of Haoyue Group fell wildly, and bad news continued to be exposed. In the face of continuous bad news, everyone in Haoyue Group could do nothing. In the third hour of the news exposure, the background of the chairman of Haoyue Group gradually began to be exposed on the internet. Conspiracies and dangers seeped into reality from the internet, and all kinds of rumors completely shrouded Chen Fangqing. In the hidden dragon sea of Yuzhou State, Chen Fangqing sat in the office and carefully read the news one after another. His face was extremely gloomy. The MP of the propaganda department of Zhongzhou State had always been one of the leaders of the Prince Group. But the news could appear in the major media, which already showed that the MP could not control the situation of the propaganda department at present. Or, did he not want to control it? The hostile takeover of the Flourishing Age Fund was carried out completely unscrupulously. Every moment, the shares of Haoyue Group entered the pocket of the Flourishing Age Fund. The Ministry of Supervision had set up a task force and began to investigate the 5 provinces exposed in the news. Dozens of officials from several provinces were involved, so the Ministry of Supervision attached great importance to it. This storm was destined to be just the beginning. No one knew how big the case would be behind these dozens of officials. Chen Fangqing felt powerless. Everyone gave a push when a wall was down. Even he had a feeling of helplessness at this time. He managed to control his emotions and dialed the internal line. When the phone was connected, he asked directly, "What did Han Donglu say?" As soon as he found out that the Flourishing Age Fund attacked Haoyue Group, he had asked his temporary secretary to contact Han Donglu and planned to meet him. On the phone, the young secretary, who was temporarily responsible for conveying Chen Fangqing's will because Yuan Lin was not there, said in a trembling voice, "Boss Han said that he is on his way to Tiannan and has no time to come to Yuzhou for the time being." Tiannan? Chen Fangqing suddenly felt a little uneasy. What is he doing in Tiannan? With whom? To be exact, he is going to Xianyuan City to attend the funeral of Emperor Dong's palace. Boss Han is now with Her Highness Situt Songyue and His Highness Wei Kunlun. The secretary said cautiously. Situt Songyue, Wei Kunlun. Saint Chen Fangqing seemed to suddenly understand something at this moment. He thought of the thunderous attack of the Flourishing Age Fund on Haoyue Group. He thought of the seemingly inexhaustible funds in Emperor Dong's palace, that even he felt a little incredible. He thought of the different voices made by those who were on good terms with Han Donglu in the group recently. Han Donglu was standing with Saint and the Hidden God. He clenched his fists and abruptly hung up the phone. His face was livid. Military counselor. He took a deep breath, stood up, and kept pacing in the office. He didn't know what to do for the time being, but his instinct was telling him that he had to do something now. His cell phone rang. Chen Fangqing looked at the number and raised his eyebrows slightly. He answered the phone at once and said, "Hello. Prime Minister, I have returned to Yuzhou." On the other end of the phone, Yuan Lin's voice rang. Chen Fangqing narrowed his eyes and said, "How was the talk?" "It went well." Yuan Lin chuckled in a low voice. "His Highness Li Guangtu is also in Yuzhou at this time. He wants to meet you." Chapter 9-10. Li Tianlan didn't have a moment of leisure in the whole afternoon and evening. After arriving at Emperor Dong's palace, he didn't call anyone for a talk after he went to the cemetery. Instead, he found Bai Qingzhao and took him to meet the families of every victim. Among the families of more than 1,000 people, except for a few who had no relatives, everyone had at least one family, or even a small one. Everyone gathered in Emperor Dong's palace at this time. In the atmosphere of great sadness, almost no one made any requests. Li Tianlan saw numb and even a little desperate faces. The parents who had lost their sons, the sisters who had lost their brothers, and the sisters who had lost their brothers. The people in Emperor Dong's palace were relatively young. Few of them were married and had children. But even so, Li Tianlan still saw some widows and children who had lost their husbands and fathers. Li Tianlan became more and more silent. Perhaps no power initially rose on the bones of its own people. The nightmare army that had lost more than half of its people. This was equivalent to the most powerful force of Emperor Dong's palace. The price of this rise was so heavy that the whole Emperor Dong's palace was covered with a layer of blood. The blood of their own people. The indescribable heaviness pressed on Li Tianlan's heart. He tried his best to meet each of the family members. Seeing their numb expressions and listening to their suppressed cries, Li Tianlan's heart was completely filled with a strong and complex emotion, which made him feel ashamed and even breathless. Bai Qingzhao made a promise without any hesitation. Everyone who died in Emperor Dong's palace would be regarded as a martyr. The pension of the military headquarters would be implemented within 3 days. Within the whole Zhongzhou state, every family member could enjoy all the benefits of a martyr's family. Li Tianlan also made a promise to Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace would award every soldier of the Nightmare Army with a Medal of Bravery. For those who died in the war, their immediate family members would have the opportunity to settle permanently in Xianyuan City and be allocated housing. In addition to the pension of Zhongzhou state, each family could get an extra 5 million yuan from Emperor Dong's palace, as well as a commercial insurance of 500,000 yuan for each immediate family member. At the same time, all the jobs and employment opportunities in Xianyuan City would be open to the relatives of the martyrs who met the conditions. The children of the martyrs could enjoy special treatment in primary schools, junior high schools, senior high schools, and universities all over Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan's voice was very light and gentle. The sword qi, as soft as a breeze, flowed slowly above Emperor Dong's palace. His voice easily covered the entire Emperor Dong's palace and reached everyone's ears. Bai Qingzhao was dumbfounded. Everyone in Emperor Dong's palace listened to Li Tianlan's promise. Even the grieving family members were in a daze. It was not that no one had thought that Emperor Dong's palace would compensate the dead, but no one had ever thought that the so-called compensation would be so. Bai Qingzhao shook his head subconsciously. For a moment he did not know what to say. The members of the Nightmare Legion were real elites. Even in Zhongzhou State, their pensions were different from those of ordinary soldiers. They were all paid according to the pension standard of grassroots officers, but slightly lower than that of middle-level officers. The exact amount was 3 million yuan for each of them. The compensation given by Li Tianlan was 5 million yuan plus an insurance of 500,000 yuan. There was only one compensation, but the insurance was 500,000 yuan for each immediate family member. This was practically the highest standard of compensation in the world. In addition, they would be allocated a house and permanent residence in Xianyuan City, which was equivalent to having a household registration in Xianyuan City. In this city, which was now like a luxury item, the work of household registration was still being prepared. But the household registration in Xianyuan City was already extremely popular. With the development of Emperor Dong's palace, the household registration in Xianyuan City would definitely become more and more popular, and the houses in Xianyuan City would naturally be more popular. In terms of other compensation, jobs, and education, Li Tianlan also made promises. There was no need to say anything more about his sincerity. Li Tianlan did not know what else he could do. Everything he said must be effective, and he himself could afford the compensation now. Not only the victims in this war, but from now on, the families of all the soldiers who died for Emperor Dong's palace could enjoy the same treatment. At this moment, Li Tianlan thought of the Li family, which was supported by Li Honghe, and the large graveyard of the Li family. Li Tianlan could not resurrect the people who died for the Li family and Emperor Dong's palace. He could only try his best to compensate them so that they would not have to worry about the future. At least, he had to be worthy of what they had done for Emperor Dong's palace. As for buying people's hearts and minds, Li Tianlan had never thought about it. Small favors might be used to buy people's hearts, but after his promise was made and realized, those who still thought so could only be called stupid. When the compensation exceeded a certain limit, it showed his sincerity. It was enough to make everyone in Emperor Dong's palace die for Li Tianlan. It was a kind of sincerity that everyone knew that even if they died in the war, their families could live a good life. When it was nearly midnight, Bai Qingzhao ended the meeting with the family members. He looked a little tired. He was no longer young and did not know martial arts, so he was naturally in poor spirits. Ning Qianqing followed Li Tianlan and glanced at Bai Qingzhao. He said softly, "I have informed the kitchen to make some supper. We won't drink wine. Anyway, eat something and rest. I'll go to the cemetery again." Li Tianlan shook his head and patted Ning Qianqing on the shoulder. "Take the Secretary General there to eat something and then rest. Don't worry about us." Ning Qianqing seemed to want to say something, but when he saw Qin Weibai, who had been quietly following Li Tianlan, he nodded and walked over with Bai Qingzhao. Qin Weibai gently held Li Tianlan's hand and exerted a little force. "Are you tired?" Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai. "I'm fine." Qin Weibai smiled gently and asked, "Are you tired?" Li Tianlan shook his head. Nowadays, unless he was greatly hurt, he basically did not feel tired. But after meeting with so many family members, his heart had been hit by strong emotions, so it was inevitable that he felt a little tired. Shaking his head, Li Tianlan took a deep breath and walked toward the cemetery. He said softly, "I asked Baitian to compile a list of the dead. I'll be in the cemetery tonight. You stay with me." He did not ask Qin Weibai if she wanted to rest. He did not ask anything. It was just a simple notice. Tomorrow was the day of burial. More than 1,000 soldiers of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan wanted them to leave without any scruples, but at the same time, he would leave their last trace in Emperor Dong's palace before they were buried. He was the owner of Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai was the hostess of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan was there, and Qin Weibai had to be there. It was their obligation. Okay. Qin Weibai nodded obediently. Li Tianlan bent down and picked Qin Weibai up. The sword light flickered slightly. Their figures disappeared in an instant. The soft sound of running water rang in the night. A chilly wind blew through Xianyuan City in the middle of the night. Qin Weibai came down from Li Tianlan's arms and saw the huge morning hall that was still lit. It was quiet in the morning hall, but many family members of the dead were keeping watch here. Seeing Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai suddenly appear, many people subconsciously stood up. Sit down. Li Tianlan shook his head. He gestured for them to sit down. He looked at the crowd in the morning hall, and did not speak for a long time. Your Majesty, A young man who looked to be in his 30s took 2 steps forward with some hesitation. Li Tianlan glanced at him, and pointed to a direction not far from the morning hall. A high black wall had been erected there. The black wall was more than 10 meters high, thick and solemn. It was a neatly cut rectangle. It was a wall with a length of tens of meters, a height of more than 10 meters, and a thickness of nearly 3 meters. The edge of the wall was carved with complicated patterns and surrounded by blooming flowers. Behind the flowers was the clear surging lake. An exquisite arch bridge crossed the water and led straight to the cemetery. Li Tianlan glanced at the high wall and said calmly, "This is the Wall of Heroes in Emperor Dong's palace. I have got the list of the dead from Beitian. I will carve their names on the Wall of Heroes one by one. This will be the last trace they left in this world, and the most important trace they left in Emperor Dong's palace. Because they are the beginning of the glory of Emperor Dong's palace, and they will become the history of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. I will not forget them. In the future, Emperor Dong's palace and my descendants will not forget them." The young man looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. The corner of his mouth moved, but he could not say anything for a while. Li Tianlan nodded to him and walked to the Wall of Heroes, which was extremely solemn and deep in the night. Li Beitian was already waiting there. He solemnly held a long list in his hand. Li Tianlan took the list and handed it to Qin Weibai. "You read it and I will write it," he ordered. It was like a ceremony. It was the simplest ceremony, but it was also the ceremony of the highest standard in Emperor Dong's palace. Okay. Qin Weibai took the list with both hands. Her body was straight, and her long hair was flying in the night wind. She looked down at the list, and there was an indescribable holiness in the watery night. Her eyes fell on the list and she read the first name. The sword energy surged in front of the Wall of Heroes. Li Tianlan put his fingers together like a sword and carefully carved the first name on the dark wall. The night was getting darker and darker. The sword energy surged on the Wall of Heroes. Li Tianlan wrote in the air, very seriously, stroke by stroke. People in the morning hall gradually came over. More and more people came over, surrounding Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai in the center. They watched and listened quietly. The hostess of Emperor Dong's palace said one name after another in a soft and gentle voice. In the bright sword light, the young Emperor Dong carved the names on the wall one by one, and they became the history of Emperor Dong's palace. Heaven and earth were silent. In front of the black Wall of Heroes, everything seemed to have frozen. Suddenly, there was an extremely suppressed cry in the crowd. The cry seemed to be contagious, and the range was getting wider and wider. Li Tianlan quietly carried out his own carving. His eyes were also very quiet, but behind the silence, there seemed to be an extremely fierce storm brewing in the depths of his eyes. From late night to dawn. From dawn to noon. When a private helicopter slowly entered the Tiannan area and approached Xianyuan City, Li Tianlan finally carved the names of more than 1,000 victims on the Wall of Heroes. Every stroke was densely packed. Li Tianlan stared at the area on the wall full of names. After a long silence, his fingers moved slightly. A line of extremely simple words appeared behind the list of names. December 2nd, desert. That was the end of his description. That was probably the only description that Zhongzhou State could reluctantly allow. He stood in front of the wall of heroes for a while and slowly turned around. Qin Weibai had carefully put away the list and looked at her quietly. After standing all night, her posture was still straight, but her lips were a little pale. Because she hadn't drunk any water. There were even some very slight chapped lips. Drink some water and have a good rest at night. Li Tianlan said softly. Qin Weibai nodded and said yes. Tianlan, is the burial after lunch? Ning Qianqing came over and asked. The funeral in Emperor Dong's palace was simple. No one was invited. Only Bai Qingzhao represented the military ministry. Except for him. Everyone else was from Emperor Dong's palace. After all, it was not a happy event. There was no noise, no so-called liveliness. It was quiet, solemn, sad and depressing. Such a Emperor Dong's palace was like a wounded beast licking its wounds alone, refusing all people who had nothing to do with the funeral and the deceased. Li Tianlan glanced at him, thought for a while, and said, ask the family members. Besides, not all the people are here yet. Wait for our 2 deputy palace masters. Ning Qianqing was stunned. Deputy palace masters? 2? He glanced at Qin Weibai subconsciously. Qin Weibai smiled and shook her head. As everyone knew, there was only one deputy palace master in Emperor Dong's palace, and he was saint of the invincible realm. Ning Qianqing raised his eyebrows and asked, who is the new deputy palace master? They will be here soon. Li Tianlan said calmly. The helicopter flew over the sky. As far as the eye could see, the vague outline of Xianyuan City could be seen. Military counselor, who had been staring at Xianyuan City, suddenly smiled and said softly, I'm a little nervous. I'm nervous. Why? Saint sat in his seat and was watching a variety show on the cabin TV. Hearing Saint's words, he shook his head subconsciously and smiled. Maybe I'm used to hiding in the dark. When being sinister becomes an instinct, people who are about to appear in the light will indeed be nervous. Han Donglu was silent for a while. He turned to look at Saint and wondered, aren't you the same? Among the 12 super masters of samsara, except for Flaming Fire, who had always been with Qin Weibai, the other super masters had their own duties. But Saint and military counselor, who ranked at the top, rarely appeared. Strictly speaking, they were the existences of hiding in the dark. Countless experts in the dark world were killed by them. In the end, they also tricked Zhongzhou State. Mount Shu and the Flourishing Age Fund directly supported the power of Samsara Palace in Zhongzhou State. They had an absolute guarantee in both money and force, especially after Saint entered the invincible realm. Of course I'm different from you. Saint snorted. That's true. Han Donglu nodded thoughtfully. I'm more low-key. I'm really different from you. You. Low-key. Situt Songyue, who had been silent, glanced at Han Donglu. For Zhongzhou State, Han Donglu was a philanthropist, the god of fortune, and the patriarch of a neutral wealthy family. But internationally, the Flourishing Age Fund could be said to be really notorious. Han Donglu's great reputation was accumulated by the Flourishing Age Fund again and again in the international financial market. Star State, East Island, countless countries. It was especially so for some countries with relatively weak forces and imperfect financial order. They hated and feared Han Donglu. Every time there was a bloody storm, Han Donglu was always at the forefront of the struggle. Such a person could not be said to be low-key in any case. That's actually right. Saint nodded. He is indeed low-key in the dark world. Situt Songyue froze and also fell silent. Han Donglu, military counselor of Samsara Palace. Before she knew this news, it was impossible for her to link these two identities together. Except for a few extremely important occasions, military counselor of Samsara Palace basically did not show up. If he was confined to the dark world, military counselor was indeed extremely low-key. So low-key that he did not even have a sense of existence. He silently controlled the core saber of Samsara Palace. He silently developed his strength. He silently extended his hand to the six. He silently supported the development of the Flourishing Age Fund. Finally, he revealed his identity at the most appropriate time. Everyone was inexplicably shocked and dumbfounded, and then there was fear from the bottom of their hearts. In today's Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan had the strongest force, and Emperor Dong's palace had the strongest cohesion. The existence of Han Donglu made up for all the shortcomings of Emperor Dong's palace. This alone was enough to show his importance. Situt Songyue thought silently for a while, and suddenly looked up at military counselor. I have a question. Military counselor was a little confused. Situt Songyue narrowed her eyes and said calmly, in the past 2 years, have you been secretly supporting the development and construction of Emperor Dong's palace? Military counselor said, and nodded. Situt Songyue did not ask how much the investment was, because it must be an astronomical number that was enough to suffocate her. She just felt a little strange. With such a large investment amount, the capital movement of the Flourishing Age Fund has not been noticed by Zhongzhou State? How is this possible? As far as I know, Zhongzhou State, especially several departments with real power in the cabinet, has been keeping an eye on the capital flow of the Flourishing Age Fund. And even if they haven't found it, don't the people in Emperor Dong's palace know it? They don't even know where their money comes from, do they? They really don't know. Han Donglu chuckled in a low voice. This sentence seemed to include Zhongzhou State and Emperor Dong's palace. Situt Songyue raised her eyebrows. Why is it like this? Han Donglu pointed to Saint and said, this guy said it was my instinct to be insidious. I don't think so. But the Flourishing Age Fund is such a big industry, and the Samsara Palace is such a big industry. As the custodian, how can I not be careful? In any case, I have to be careful. So, Situt Songyue was thoughtful. So it's me who secretly funded the construction of Emperor Dong's palace, but it's not the Flourishing Age Fund. Situt Songyue was silent for half a minute, and then slowly said, that is to say, the Flourishing Age Fund is not your entire industry. Behind the Flourishing Age Fund, you have other sources of money? It's the Samsara Palace. Han Donglu corrected her and nodded. Of course, the Flourishing Age Fund is a part of us that has been exposed. When this part was exposed, the palace master was ready to be found out by the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. So he left a part of the industry to develop in secret. But they never found out. I disguised it so well. It's a pity. Industry, Situt Songyue was thoughtful. What industries do you have in Zhongzhou State? Or what industries do you have in the world? Everyone thought that Han Donglu of the Flourishing Age Fund was a financial giant. Although he was also involved in industry, he did not have many, and many of his projects were with Zhongzhou State. But now it seemed that the Samsara Palace was more deeply hidden than he had imagined. A lot. Han Donglu thought for a while. For him, who wanted to retire and rest, these problems would be handed over to Situt Songyue and Saint sooner or later. He thought seriously and slowly said, we have a lot of shares in many enterprises. Some of them are held in secret, and some are entrusted with shares. Many. Well, I'll sort out the details and give them to you. Many. Situt Songyue thought about the so-called a lot, and asked subconsciously, how many? More than 600. Han Donglu said casually. How many? Situt Songyue felt that her ears could not be trusted for a moment. I must have misheard. I must have misheard. More than 600, more than 1/10 of which belong to the world's top 500 companies. There are also several funds similar to the Flourishing Age Fund. Han Donglu said slowly, that's about it. Situt Songyue felt a little breathless for a moment. Everything Han Donglu said was completely beyond her wildest imagination. She had no idea how much wealth it meant. In fact, one thing is right. Saint suddenly said, the outside world thinks that the Flourishing Age Fund can mobilize more than 1 trillion funds in the shortest time. It's not wrong, but they seem to have misunderstood something. The so-called trillion is not Zhongzhou State dollars, but star dollars. Situt Songyue took several deep breaths in a row, but still said nothing. Star dollars was the currency of Star State. In recent decades, the exchange rate with Zhongzhou State dollars had been 1 to 3, which meant that the Flourishing Age Fund was 1/3 of the economic strength exposed by Samsara Palace. This is, how did they do it? Situt Songyue couldn't help but ask, and her tone was full of disbelief. She really didn't know how to express her inner amazement. This was done by the palace master. Han Donglu said calmly. Situt Songyue was silent for a long time, and then whispered, a miracle. Miracle. Han Donglu said the word silently several times, and then laughed. He pointed to Xianyuan City, which was already close at hand. The real miracle is in front of us. Situd Songyue stood up and quietly looked at Xianyuan City, which was getting closer and closer, and the eye-catching Emperor Dong's palace in Xianyuan City. She took a deep breath, and her face gradually calmed down. Situd Songyue, Wei Kunlun, Han Donglu. They were only 3 people. But today they brought a lot of things. The elites of Mount Shu and Sai City would enter Emperor Dong's palace as soon as possible and become a new, larger nightmare legion than before. The Flourishing Age Fund and all the industries of Samsara Palace would be integrated with Emperor Dong's palace as soon as possible to make up for all the shortcomings of Emperor Dong's palace. From today on, Han Donglu would serve as the chief financial officer of Emperor Dong's palace, responsible for the merger of the Flourishing Age Fund and Emperor Dong's palace. This would also be his last job before retirement. And Situd Songyue would become the 2nd deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, and the 3rd invincible realm expert of Emperor Dong's palace. A new identity, a new path, a new future, and a new stage. Under the sun, the helicopter slowly landed in the solemn and silent Emperor Dong's palace. The 3 of them tidied up their clothes and slowly walked out of the cabin. In a solemn atmosphere. This was destined to be a grand debut that shocked the world. Divine Emperor of 9 Heavens. Chapter 9:11. It was December 7th. It was a snowstorm in Beihai. It seemed to be located in the northernmost part of Zhongzhou State. The winter here was extremely cold and beautiful. The flying snow was almost endless. Wang Shengxiao sat on the steps of the stage of Formidable Person and listened to the loud sound of the tide in the distance quietly. He was motionless and let the snowflakes fall on him, like a snowman. The sword energy all over the sky surged from the distant sea, and then slowly dispersed. The sword energy covered the entire stage of Formidable Person, and the sword intent became more and more delicate. Wang Shengxiao closed his eyes and seemed to be in eternal meditation. The sword energy tide in the depths of Beihai had become more and more active. From once a day in the beginning to twice a day now. The surging sword intent became more and more delicate and clear. Wang Shengxiao meditated on the stage of Formidable Person every morning and night. Rain or shine. He felt the increasingly delicate sword intent and gained something almost every day. After his martial arts officially broke through the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and became a half-step invincible realm expert, his meditation in the sword intent was far more efficient than practicing hard in other places. Wang Shengxiao meditated twice a day for about 6 hours in total, which was the limit of his meditation. It was not that his willpower couldn't support him to continue meditating, but as the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, it was really difficult for him to spare extra time for cultivation. However, although 6 hours of meditation a day was not much, in the sword energy tide, it was equivalent to about a week of hard practice in a normal state, or even more. Meditation was to train his willpower and establish his own martial arts path in the deepest level of quietness. Now he gained something every day, and he gained something every day in the half-step invincible realm. It was absolutely a terrifying thing. The peaceful and heavy sword energy tide began to fade slowly, becoming more and more ethereal and lofty. Wang Shengxiao opened his eyes and stood facing Beihai for a while. Then he slowly turned around and walked down the stage of Formidable Person. It was quiet on Mount Dibing. The guards stood silently in their posts, like snowmen. Wang Shengxiao walked into his huge palace in the snowstorm. The heating supply in the hall of the palace was extremely sufficient. Wang Shengxiao casually took off his coat and said with a smile, "It's been quite cold recently." Lu Shuanghua was already sitting on the sofa in the hall. When he saw Wang Shengxiao, he stood up with a smile and said casually, "According to the weather station, the blizzard will last until tomorrow morning, and then it will turn into heavy snow. In the next half a month, there will be no sunny days." The meteorological observatory in Beihai had always been extremely accurate, and there was basically no deviation. Wang Shengxiao smiled and said meaningfully, "It doesn't matter. We should be able to see the sun in half a month." Lu Shuanghua nodded in agreement. She bent down to pick up a stack of documents and handed them to Wang Shengxiao. She said softly, Everything you want is here. If there's nothing else, I should go back. He was responsible for all the intelligence of Beihai and Zhongzhou state. With Li Tianlan's release from prison, Lu Shuanghua had become the busiest person in the Wang family of Beihai. Everyone in the Wang family of Beihai was busy. A large number of people were building the defense system of Beihai, searching for the elites of the superpowers who had sneaked into Beihai, and preparing for the next decisive battle. There were battles almost every day in every city in Beihai, but Lu Shuanghua was still the busiest. Collecting intelligence about Emperor Dong's palace, targeting the prince group, and using some information to attack the opponents, Zhongzhou state was really turbulent in a few days. Lu Shuanghua didn't even have time to rest. Don't worry. You can leave after dinner. There are many things to do. Wang Shengxiao waved his hand and asked Lu Shuanghua to sit down. He looked down at the report in his hand. This was an assessment report that could not be said to be detailed. It could even be said to be very rough and simple. Not only the Wang family of Beihai, but also all the superpowers in the world. Even many countries, groups, and wealthy families in Zhongzhou state had a similar report. However, because different countries and wealthy families had different resources, the contents of their reports would be different. Relatively speaking, the contents of the Wang family of Beihai's report were undoubtedly more substantial. This was a report about Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace did not invite anyone to the funeral in Xianyuan City 2 days ago. But countless eyes were focused on Xianyuan City. So when the funeral began and Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai knelt in front of the cemetery at the same time, a piece of shocking news swept the world like a hurricane. After Saint Wei Kunlun, Emperor Dong's palace welcomed the second deputy palace master of the invincible realm, Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou state. Sai City of Zhongzhou state would be merged into Emperor Dong's palace and renamed Hall of Falling Stars. All the top assassins of Sai City had found their positions in Emperor Dong's palace. Compared with Situ Tsangyue joining Emperor Dong's palace, the identity of military counselor was more frightening. Military counselor Han Donglu. Everyone knew what this identity meant. On the afternoon of the funeral, Li Tianlan and Han Donglu had signed a series of documents at the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. The Flourishing Age Fund would be merged into Emperor Dong's palace. In the series of documents, Han Donglu directly and unconditionally transferred 85% of the shares of the Flourishing Age Fund to Li Tianlan. The entire Flourishing Age Fund, a large consortium, really became Li Tianlan's property the moment the documents were signed. On the night of December 5th, the elites of Mount Shu, which belonged to Nirvana Sword Master Wei Kunlun and Great Void Sword Master Li Beitian, officially left Mount Shu and joined Emperor Dong's palace. The elites of Sai City and the forces of Mount Shu entered Xianyuan City at the same time. Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang Sword Master of Mount Shu, witnessed all this and then took away Nirvana Sword and Great Void Sword of Mount Shu. This also meant that Wei Kunlun and Li Beitian officially left Mount Shu. With the addition of Mount Shu, the Flourishing Age Fund, and Sai City, the Nightmare Troop, which had been badly injured, immediately returned to its peak state, and its strength was even stronger than before. December 5th. This was a day destined to be remembered by the whole dark world. Too many things happened on this day. To sum up, Emperor Dong's palace rose completely, and it really soared to the sky. Countless forces in the whole dark world were in turmoil. Zhongzhou state was also in turmoil. For a moment, people didn't even know what it meant when half of the forces of Mount Shu, the forces of Sai City, and the Flourishing Age Fund joined Emperor Dong's palace. So there was the evaluation report in Wang Xingxiao's hand. All the forces were using their own intelligence to make analysis. They were analyzing a series of chain reactions that might be triggered after the three forces merged into Emperor Dong's palace. One thing was certain. Today's Emperor Dong's palace might not be a superpower in the dark world as a whole, but in terms of experts and wealth, it definitely had the strength of a top superpower. More importantly, this was just the beginning. It was a magnificent and unparalleled beginning. What would Emperor Dong's palace become in the future? This was a problem that made everyone unable to eat or sleep in peace. Wang Shengxiao looked at the report in his hand carefully. Although the report was relatively general, it could actually be regarded as detailed. The report listed a series of industries of the Flourishing Age Fund, as well as its superficial contacts and a large number of investments. Compared with Mount Shu and Sai City, the report about the Flourishing Age Fund occupied more than 80% of the space. Combining all the intelligence that the Flourishing Age Fund could collect, the intelligence personnel of Jiangnan Province analyzed the changes that occurred after the Flourishing Age Fund entered Emperor Dong's palace one by one. The analysis was concise and clear. Wang Shengxiao flipped through it and found that there were hundreds of analyses of the Flourishing Age Fund alone. He saw an extremely sensitive word at the end of the Flourishing Age Fund. Wang Shengxiao raised his eyebrows. A new group? This is inevitable. Lu Shuanghua glanced at him and said slowly, Han Donglu is the military counselor of Samsara Palace. No one thought of this, but this is also the biggest gain of Emperor Dong's palace. The endless money means that Emperor Dong's palace has passed the initial primitive accumulation stage. But for Zhongzhou State and for us, the most troublesome thing is Han Donglu's contacts. Over the years since the emergence of the Flourishing Age Fund, Han Donglu has been accepting of all kinds of investments. He alone can support a neutral wealthy family that even the Wang family of Beihai dare not underestimate. You should know better than me how formidable his contacts are. Wang Shengxiao was silent. And now it seems that the signs of a new group are obvious. Lu Shuanghua continued. 2 days passed after the funeral. Tiannan was very calm. But inside Zhongzhou State, there were already stormy waves. The betrayal of the Special Warfare Group was getting more and more intense. With the establishment of a super high-standard task force led by Dongqing Wudi, elite investigators from various departments joined the task force. They investigated along the route of retreat of the Burning Legion. When they raided Yuzhou, there were more and more clues. The Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou was in a state of panic. Several high-level officials had been directly dismissed and put under control. The Prince Group, which started with the Haoyue Group, was also not calm inside. This was originally a storm stirred up by the Wang family of Beihai, but a lot of evidence suddenly emerged out of thin air. Everything about the chairman of the Haoyue Group was exposed little by little. He was Chen Fengqing's nephew, which was really hard not to associate. Chen Fengqing's personal reputation almost suffered a devastating blow. And inside the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group, different voices had gradually begun to appear. Many backbone forces were asking for self-examination. In the chaotic situation, the military counselor Han Donglu, who left Xianyuan City, flew to Tianfu Province as his first stop, which was enough to explain a lot of problems. And the attitude of the North Group had also changed dramatically. They attacked the Prince Group without mercy. Now in Zhongzhou State, almost everyone saw an opportunity. Behind the great turmoil and storm, there was often an equally great division of interests. No one was willing to miss this carnival. There were also voices in the academics that asked for a good investigation of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. As for the Southeast Group and the Giant Group, as the leaders of a series of events, their positions were needless to say. At present, the framework of the new group was still very vague, at least in the eyes of outsiders. Wang Shengxiao could only roughly circle a range. Among the voices of self-examination in the Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group, there must be a considerable part of them who had a close relationship with Han Donglu. A considerable part of this part had decided to change their position and join the new group, while the others were mostly influenced by the rhythm. As long as the two groups investigated carefully, they could basically find out who the people in the new group were. The two groups were also clear about this, but in the face of this situation, they could do nothing. As for the North Group, it was the group that had the deepest involvement with Han Donglu. The Flourishing Age Fund also invested the most in the North Group. If the new group was established, it was hard to say whether the North Group would exist or not. Who would join the new group and what position they would get after the election. Everyone, including the North Group, could not be sure. And the academics also could not be sure. For the time being, it was hard to say whether those who insisted on investigating the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group were doing it for their personal interests or for the new group. As for the Southeast Group, a few names flashed through Wang Shengxiao's mind, and he had another headache. Everyone in the Southeast Group was attacking the Prince Group to death. At present, it was impossible to tell how many people had other ideas. Not counting those who could not be confirmed, Wang Shengxiao could be sure that they were a big force. Some of them had been loyal to the Li family when Beihai and the Li family were close. What was a group? The so-called group was the power produced by the combination of relatively loose and vague organizations with clear positions. This was not a company party. The senior officials scattered all over Zhongzhou state had their own attitudes. In many cases, it was hard to tell who was on whose side. Each group roughly had its own core circle, which was also the core force of the group, and most of the others were relatively peripheral personnel. The new group appeared very suddenly. This also meant that for many years or even 1 or 2 elections in the future, it was difficult for anyone except Emperor Dong's palace to really confirm the specific lineup of the new group. Some core members with high positions could confirm it. But what about the people 1 level lower? What about the people 1 level lower? This also meant that in the future, all the major groups would be in the same position as the new group. This kind of advantage was so huge that it was unimaginable. Maybe the major groups would push the candidates they favored and supported, only to find out in the end that they were cultivating talents for the new group. This was very likely. As for the general election next year, the situation of the general election would be more complicated than before. Why not merge with the giant group? Li Tianlan will also be the leader of the giant group in the future. Wang Shengxiao said slowly. It's impossible for Emperor Dong's palace to do this. The disadvantages outweigh the advantages. It's not easy to control. Lu Shuanghua shook her head. The new group. Wang Shengxiao muttered to himself and smiled bitterly. He held the information and was silent for a long time. He was very ambitious and wanted a lot. In the final battle in Beihai, in addition to killing all the enemies, his most important goal was the Xianyuanfeng in Li Tianlan's hand. Or rather, ruthlessness. That was an important condition to ensure that the Wang family of Beihai was invincible. As compensation for Li Tianlan, after he got ruthlessness, he originally planned to give Li Tianlan a new group. But now a new group had appeared. So what else could he give? It was impossible to take Xianyuanfeng without paying a huge price. If he snatched it, it meant that after the final battle in Beihai, the cooperation between the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace would be completely broken. They would turn against each other, and then become mortal enemies. If that was the case, Wang Shengxiao was not afraid. With Xianyuanfeng, even Li Tianlan would not be his opponent. But the problem was that once he snatched it, the Lin clan's attitude would change. Wang Shengxiao rubbed his forehead hard. After a long time he muttered to himself, "It's really difficult." Chapter 9:12. Wang Shengxiao finally put down the document in his hand. Countless analyses in this document were favorable to Emperor Dong's palace, which meant that the intelligence personnel and senior personnel of the Wang family of Beihai were optimistic about the integration of the Flourishing Age Fund, Sai City, and Mount Shu with Emperor Dong's palace. They were optimistic about the abilities of Li Tianlan, Wei Kunlun, Han Donglu, and Situt Songyue. They didn't think that the merger would bring trouble to Emperor Dong's palace. On the contrary, the merger would only bring Li Tianlan huge and irresistible benefits. This was not what Wang Shengxiao had expected. To be exact, the fact that several superpowers joined Emperor Dong's palace one after another was not what Wang Shengxiao had expected. He looked calm on the surface, but his mind was in a mess. The more he read the document, the less he could make up his mind. Shaking his head, Wang Shengxiao smiled and said, "That's it for now. Stay for lunch and have a drink together." Lu Shuanghua hesitated. He nodded and said, "All right." He stood up and said, "I'm going to talk to Xian Ming." As the person in charge of all the intelligence of Beihai and Zhongzhou state, it was necessary to talk to the person in charge of all the intelligence of Beihai and unify the intelligence in his hands. Wang Shengxiao nodded and agreed. Lu Shuanghua bowed slightly and took his leave. Just as he was about to leave the hall, his footsteps paused as if he wanted to say something. "What?" Wang Shengxiao noticed his abnormality and asked casually. Lu Shuanghua hesitated. Then he turned around and smiled. "Patriarch, what's the attitude of the Wang family of Beihai toward Emperor Dong's palace?" He had to ask this question clearly. Regardless of what he thought in his heart, he was the person in charge of Jiangnan society, responsible for collecting all the intelligence of Zhongzhou state for the Wang family of Beihai. The rise of Emperor Dong's palace was unstoppable. In the future, Li Tianlan would be more and more important on the stage of Zhongzhou state. If he did not figure out the attitude of Mount Dibbing in advance, it meant that Jiangnan society was likely to lose some important intelligence. What do you mean? Wang Shengxiao remained calm. As far as I know, although we are not on good terms with Emperor Dong's palace now, at least we have the same goal. But when our development model overlaps and we have a strong enemy, the two forces with the same development model are each other's best allies. That is to say, the current strength of Emperor Dong's palace is not bad for us. Lu Shuanghua said calmly. That's right. Wang Shengxiao nodded. But you missed one word now. The strength of Emperor Dong's palace is not bad for us now, but this kind of strength can't go beyond the limit. We are allies with Emperor Dong's palace, but no one in the Wang family of Beihai wants the so-called allies to be stronger than themselves. The two sides can cooperate now because they both need to protect themselves. They have common interests and a common position. But what about after the Prince Group's matter ends? With a strong enemy on the side, the two forces with overlapping development models are indeed the best allies for each other. But Zhongzhou state can't always target Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. Zhongzhou state needs opportunities. When there are no opportunities, tell me, what are the two forces with almost overlapping development models? Lu Shuanghua was silent for a while, then said softly, opponent. There's no need to fight to the death, but it's destined that we can't coexist peacefully. Wang Shengxiao said slowly, to some extent, this kind of relationship is also a means to calm down strong enemies. He leaned back and said, you know what to do. Lu Shuanghua nodded, stood there for a while, then turned around and left the hall. A tall lady walked in at the same time. Lu Shuanghua glanced at her. The two nodded slightly and walked past each other. The woman paused in front of the hall door, turned her head and looked at Lu Shuanghua thoughtfully, then walked into the hall. Wang Shengxiao had already stood up from the sofa and called his aunt. There's no problem in Shengzhou, at least for the time being. Phoenix, who had an obvious scar on her face, said in a calm tone. This woman, who was entangled with the Wang family of Beihai but had to stay in Beihai because of summer solstice, could be said to be the strongest combat force of the Wang family of Beihai now. She and Wang Tianzong's protector, Punishment, had been traveling to various cities in Beihai in recent days. After getting the exact information, she killed nearly 10 thundershocking realm experts in a short time. Today, the elites of the superpowers lurking in Shengzhou had basically been killed. Thank you for your hard work, Aunt. Wang Shengxiao smiled. But new lurkers will soon enter Shengzhou. There's no end to these people. Recently, their actions are getting more and more obvious, especially in East Island. They almost don't cover up anymore. Just kill them again. Phoenix's voice was calm and cold. Wang Shengxiao nodded, sat down again and said, Aunt, what can I do for you? Let me see how you're going to court death. Phoenix stared into Wang Shengxiao's eyes and said seriously. Wang Shengxiao looked up in surprise, a little confused. Emperor Dong's palace now has 2 invincible realm experts. You know what that means. Their military power may still be weak, but if you only look at the experts, they have 2 invincible realm experts and Li Tianlan, who hasn't reached the invincible realm but whose combat capability is very likely to be close to the peak of the invincible realm. Now Emperor Dong's palace can be said to be the #1 superpower in the dark world in terms of high-end combat capability. You want to cooperate with them, and now you are already in a cooperative state. Emperor Dong's palace has the Flourishing Age Fund, Sai City, and half of the power of Mount Shu. Don't forget the relationship between Jade Pool in Zhongzhou State and the Dongqing clan. Next, a large part of Jade Pool's power may also join Emperor Dong's palace. They have money and people, and their military power will soon become strong. Your cooperation with Emperor Dong's palace is tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin. What's worse is that in this cooperation, you still want to get Xianyuan Feng. Xia Huang paused, looked at Wang Shengxiao, and said with some incomprehension, Do you really want to die? Wang Shengxiao was silent for a long time before he said slowly, That's the core that can guarantee the Wang family of Beihai's invincibility. With Wu Qing, even if my father hasn't recovered from his injury, I can still be invincible in the world. Even if my martial arts can't make any progress in my life, Li Tianlan will become the chosen one in the future, and the Wang family of Beihai will also have the capital to fight against Emperor Dong's palace in the most cutting-edge combat capability. We now have a very good opportunity, or even the best opportunity. I have 80% confidence that I can take down Wu Qing, not to deal with Li Tianlan now, but to fight against the truly invincible Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace in the future. Though I have no choice. If I can't become the chosen one, Wu Qing is the core trump card to ensure the Wang family of Beihai's dominance in the dark world. Wu Qing, Phoenix murmured to herself. Xian Yuanfeng is conscious and has its own thoughts and will. Right now, it's the amalgamation of many murderous weapons. When it has enough energy, its will is the most active. You can't say that it's a sword. You can even treat it like a person. Wang Shengxiao said slowly. Heh. Phoenix sneered. A person? If it can be regarded as a person, then it can be said to be truly loyal to Li Tianlan. If you take it away, will it definitely work for you? It is the fusion of many murderous weapons. What is a murderous weapon? For a force, a murderous weapon is enough to make them fight for it. If you take Xin Yuanfeng, do you think Li Tianlan will let it go? He doesn't need the so-called new group you gave him now. As long as I get Wu Qing, I naturally won't be afraid of Li Tianlan. Wang Shengxiao said calmly. Wu Qing is not yours. Can you make use of it? Phoenix narrowed her eyes. She didn't understand Wang Shengxiao's persistence. And even if you can make use of Wu Qing, it is a murderous weapon in nature. When its energy is exhausted, the role it can play is extremely limited. With its own combat capability, with the help of 13 floors and Xian Yuanfeng, it will be invincible. Yes. Wang Shengxiao said blandly, when the time is right, Wu Qing can destroy Wu Qing's will in an instant. What it needs is Wu Qing's energy. Once the two are combined, it will become more complete. At that time, there won't be a problem of insufficient energy. As long as you don't squander it, it can always be used. Wu Qing, Phoenix's face was solemn. She never thought of herself as a member of the Wang family of Beihai. Naturally, she couldn't get in touch with the secrets that only the patriarchs of each generation could. But it was not the first time she heard the word Wu Qing. Destroy Xin Yuanfeng's will in an instant? She felt like she was listening to a joke. What is Wu Qing? Phoenix asked in a serious tone. Wang Shengxiao was silent for a while. Then he said core. Phoenix seemed to want to ask something else, but Wang Shengxiao interrupted her and asked, how is East Island? Phoenix paused for a while and shook her head slightly. You should ask Xianming about this. I don't know. But according to what I know, East Island has really put in a lot of effort and mobilized almost all the forces that can be mobilized. If this is a small war, we can't get support from Zhongzhou State. We can only rely on Beihai Corps. What about the odds of winning? Wang Shengxiao asked. It depends on the result of the final battle. If it's just about the army, it's almost impossible for us to defeat a country. East Island is small, but it's also a powerful country. Phoenix shook her head. Wang Shengxiao leaned on the sofa, clicked his tongue, and laughed. I remember a saying, a dog can't stop eating shit. Oh, that's not an appropriate description. Or, it's called forgetting the pain after the wound is healed. How many lessons do you think East Island needs to learn to understand its situation? 5 years ago, they suffered a big loss in the final battle of Heaven Capital. Now it's only been 5 years, and they actually forgot it. What a joke. She thought for a while, then shook her head and said, this time is different. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, Zhongzhou State restrained the main force of East Island. All the forces in the world took advantage of the situation, and finally helped the purgatory of Heaven Capital. But now the forces that cooperate with East Island are all forces that are active in the dark world. Their attention is all on East Island, and Zhongzhou State can't help you. The general election is coming, and Zhongzhou State is troubled. They can't take care of East Island. What about Emperor Dong's palace? Wang Shengxiao suddenly said. Now Emperor Dong's palace has a strong army, two superiors of the invincible realm, and Li Tianlan. Do you think he can put all the resources of Emperor Dong's palace into the final battle of Beihai? Li Tianlan and I don't have such a deep friendship. Although we are now in a cooperative relationship, from his standpoint, he needs the Wang family of Beihai, which has suffered a heavy loss but can still maintain a certain strength. If Beihai wins the final battle, he doesn't want to see it. I'm sure that Li Tianlan won't use too much power in the final battle of Beihai. Now there's Du Hanin, Su Chu, and some elites of Emperor Dong's palace here. Li Tianlan will come, but he will bring one deputy palace master of the invincible realm at most, or none at most. So, where will the two deputy palace masters go, do you think? Wang Shengxiao's smile was complicated. Where will they go? Phoenix subconsciously straightened her body. East Island. Wang Shengxiao nodded. It's obvious, isn't it? It's a piece of cake for Li Tianlan to send most of the forces to take down East Island while East Island is empty. But in this way, Xianyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace will also be empty inside. Aren't they afraid? Afraid of what? Wang Shengxiao interrupted her. Is there anything in Xianyuan City that needs to be protected now? The construction of the city did cost a lot of money, but now Li Tianlan is not short of money. So what if he demolishes the castle? At worst, he can rebuild it. Besides, who will be interested in his castle? This has been proven long ago. In the past 2 years, except for the Burning Legion's raid on Tunan, Saint has been in Yuzhou for the past 2 years. Emperor Dong's palace is not invincible, but who dares to touch them? Let's not talk about whether they dare or not. What's the point? With the current strength of Emperor Dong's palace, no matter which force dares to touch the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace, they will have to face Li Tianlan's crazy revenge. It's not necessary. Emperor Dong's palace must go to East Island. Not only Emperor Dong's palace, but also the Purgatory of Heaven Capital has been silent for too long. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, my father fought with Li Guangtu. He told me in private that Li Guangtu's martial arts were very special. Being able to return to the peak of the invincible realm was enough to explain a lot of things, but it also limited his upper limit. He couldn't touch the real supreme realm, but in terms of rebuilding the foundation, his martial arts were indeed unparalleled. In 2 years, Li Guangtu could at least restore some combat capability. In 2 years, Li Guangtu can at least restore some of his combat capability. Now East Island mobilizes people on a large scale, and its interior is empty. How can the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which has been excluded in the past 2 years, let go of such a good opportunity? They will definitely take action. East Island's character is really stupid. After this, East Island will be very lively. East Island, Emperor Dong's palace, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital will divide the world into 3? His voice was a little emotional. The most uncomfortable thing is that we have to deal with the next final battle. I'm afraid we won't have a share in East Island, the fat meat. He shook his head. What a pity. Chapter 913. 2 Invincible Realm Experts. The bright sun shone in the study. His Majesty gently dragged the information in front of him over and said with a smile, "It's really difficult to deal with." In front of him was also an evaluation report about Emperor Dong's palace. After the funeral, Emperor Dong's palace was more powerful than before, and it no longer had any obvious shortcomings. With Sai City, the Flourishing Age Fund, and half of Mount Shu joining Emperor Dong's palace, and with Li Tianlan's return, the strength of Emperor Dong's palace was not simply doubled. Its comprehensive strength had increased dozens of times. A force that was originally supported by young people swallowed the largest financial group in Zhongzhou State, and the strongest assassin organization in Zhongzhou State within 1 day without encountering any obstacles. This was enough to make Emperor Dong's palace expand into a real behemoth. And it was certain that as long as Li Tianlan still stood at the peak of the force in the dark world, there would be no possibility of accidents during the integration of Emperor Dong's palace. It was no exaggeration to say that Emperor Dong's palace had now become the focus of the major forces in the dark world. It was also a big problem for them. Every force had an evaluation. But because of different intelligence and different focus, the information of each party would naturally be slightly different. Some people paid attention to the new group. Some people paid attention to the huge financial resources of Emperor Dong's palace. And His Majesty was most concerned about the force of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan, Saint Wei Kunlun, and hidden god Situt Songyue. These three people had now formed the golden triangle of Emperor Dong's palace. And they were also at the top of the pyramid of individual force in the entire dark world. This lineup was enough to make anyone's scalp numb in front of them. His Majesty gently tapped the information in front of him and laughed. Now it's not just my scalp that's numb, but my whole body. We don't only have 2 invincible realm experts. Molade stood in front of His Majesty and was a little unconvinced. Your Majesty, you have 4 disciples, and the 3 who are still alive are all in the invincible realm. Not to mention His Majesty's personal strength, Molade himself was extremely close to the peak of the invincible realm. Yagyud Songchuan had also stabilized his invincible realm. Jiang Guochu was a new invincible realm expert, but he was invincible. Even if he was a new invincible realm expert, his realm was solid. If the 3 disciples stood together, they might not be much worse than the 3 people in Emperor Dong's palace. Your Majesty, you hold back Li Tianlan. I can barely hold back Situt Songyue and Wei Kunlun. Although I can't win, with the help of Yagyud Songchuan and Jiang Guochu, it is completely possible to kill them all. Molade was filled with killing intent. You forgot about Xian Yuanfeng, or in other words Wu Qing. His Majesty shook his head. And even if we can forget about that sword, can we win? 3 disciples. It's a good lineup, but it's just a good lineup. Li Tianlan has 2 invincible realm experts, and he can also gain the loyalty of 2 invincible realm experts. His Majesty laughed at himself. What about me? You can trust my loyalty completely. Molade's tone was solemn and serious, as if he was making an oath. I can trust you, His Majesty said blandly. But what about Yagyud Songchuan and Jiang Guochu? I won't trust them completely unless I'm stupid. Similarly, they can't be completely loyal to me. No, they can't even be loyal to me. The 2 of us are completely using each other. It's just that I have a certain amount of initiative. I can give them benefits, and they can also give me benefits. This kind of benefit is great, but it's not so great that they can completely rely on me. Molade was silent for a while and whispered, but Li Tianlan is dying. We don't need to worry too much about Emperor Dong's palace. You don't understand what I mean, His Majesty said calmly. It's not a matter of whether we should worry about Li Tianlan or not. Even if Li Tianlan doesn't die, he's just an enemy. As far as we are concerned, what we need is power, more powerful forces, more power. A Knights Templar that only belongs to us is not enough. Do you understand? I understand, Molade said seriously. Your Highness, I can give you power, and I will completely obey your will. Very good. His Majesty nodded. Contact the Pope. I want to borrow 2,000 Saint Warriors. If he is willing, I can agree to 2 conditions. The premise is that he must lend me the most elite Saint Warriors. In the 2 years after the chaos, he should have a lot of elites in his hands. 2,000 Saint Warriors. Molade was a little stunned. He shook his head subconsciously. You want the Holy Disarmament Corps to participate in the final battle in North Sea? That's impossible. It's hard for him to agree. Not North Sea. His Majesty narrowed his eyes. It's East Island. Don't you think that East Island is too empty now? Emperor Dong's palace, which is so empty that its strength has greatly increased, will definitely not let go of this opportunity. Similarly, the Purgatory of Heaven capital will not let go of this opportunity, either. Molade's body trembled. He lowered his head, thinking about the possibility of borrowing 2,000 Saint Warriors. If it was used in the final battle in North Sea, it was almost impossible. North Sea was too sensitive now. There were Zhongzhou State, East Island, Emperor Dong's palace, the Jiang family of South America, and countless other forces involved. The eyes of the whole world fell on this place. Even if His Majesty in the Holy Land wanted to do something, it would not be convenient. After all, the Holy Disarmament Corps did not represent the dark forces. If they were unscrupulous in everything they did, there would be no need to set up a Knights Templar to deal with the affairs of the dark world. But if 2,000 Saint Warriors were placed in East Island, Just facing Emperor Dong's palace was equivalent to a conflict in the Dark World, which was completely different from the final battle in North Sea. 2,000 saint warriors, he muttered to himself and suddenly said, 2,000 people, is that enough? There's no other way. If the Pope agrees, 2,000 people should be his bottom line. It's impossible to add one more. His Majesty shook his head. Do you think that Emperor Dong's palace will definitely take advantage of the empty East Island to occupy the Dark World of East Island? So you want to use these 2,000 saint warriors to stop Emperor Dong's palace? Molade hesitated. But now there is more than one invincible realm expert in Emperor Dong's palace. In the final battle in North Sea, it's difficult for Situ Tsangyue and Wei Kunlun to appear in North Sea. This means that if there are no accidents, these two invincible realm experts will appear in East Island at that time. He did not make it very clear, but His Majesty understood what he meant. If Emperor Dong's palace's lineup in East Island consisted of two invincible realm experts and a large number of elites, 2,000 saint warriors would not be able to do anything at all. It doesn't matter. There's also the Purgatory of Heaven capital. I've reached an agreement with Li Kuangtu. As for the invincible realm experts, there will be at least one daybreak. His Majesty said simply. Are we going to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital in East Island? Molade frowned and was a little worried. After all, the Purgatory of Heaven capital had once occupied the Dark World of East Island. Although it had not been a long time, it was just that they had not been exposed for a long time. Before the final battle in Heaven capital, no one knew how long they had developed in East Island. Even if they were severely suppressed now, they would definitely have countless pawns and countless special channels. His Majesty wanted East Island, but he had to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. This was really asking a tiger for its skin. In the end, it was very likely that he would lose everything. To deal with Emperor Dong's palace, of course, we have to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But it's just cooperation on this matter. His Majesty laughed in a low voice. We also have Jifeng Sword Training School. In terms of influence, it is not inferior to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. So what we have to do is to secretly enter East Island in advance, and make a move with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When the forces of Emperor Dong's palace enter East Island, the two sides will work together to ambush them. Once they enter East Island, it will be difficult for them to go back alive. Molade suddenly became excited. After we get rid of Emperor Dong's palace, we'll deal with the Purgatory of Heaven capital first. Then we'll monopolize East Island? His Majesty looked at him strangely and shook his head. I don't want to fall out with Li Kuangtu yet. If everything goes well, he will withdraw from East Island. Molade was stunned and a little confused. His Majesty sighed. The Purgatory of Heaven capital entering East Island is not Li Kuangtu's decision, but his other preparation. He doesn't want to gain nothing. He promised to cooperate with us to attack Li Tianlan in Beihai, but he is also prepared for our failure in the final battle in Beihai. Although it is impossible, if we really fail, Li Kuangtu will return to East Island as soon as possible. At that time, with the failure, East Island will be greatly weakened, and he can regain control of the Dark World of East Island. But what will happen if we succeed? Have you ever thought about it? Molade took a deep breath and was speechless for a while. If they succeeded in the final battle in Beihai, it meant that their plan was extremely successful. The Wang family of Beihai would be destroyed, and Li Tianlan would die. On the battlefield of East Island, as His Majesty and Li Kuangtu entered East Island, Wei Kunlun and Situ Tsangyue would definitely die, which also meant the destruction of Emperor Dong's palace. If we succeed, Li Kuangtu will not care about East Island at all. He may be a lunatic, but he is definitely not a fool. He will know how to retreat and compromise. At that time, as long as I show my determination to take over East Island, he will not entangle himself with me, because annexing Emperor Dong's palace is the most important thing for him at that time. Now Emperor Dong's palace is different from a few days ago. If the Purgatory of Heaven capital swallows Emperor Dong's palace, it means swallowing the flourishing Age Fund and Sai City. Such a big profit also means a big risk. Li Kuangtu will definitely do his best. So Molade's voice was dry. At that time, Zhongzhou State will annex Beihai. Li Guangtu will annex Tiannan, and we'll take over East Island. Each of us will get what we want. Not only East Island. His Majesty chuckled softly. If the plan succeeds, we'll also get Kunlun City. After that, it will be my and Li Guangtu's era. But in the end, it's still my era. I see. Molade shook his head with a wry smile. Sure enough, I'm still suitable to follow you. This way, I don't need to think too much. His Majesty smiled and said lightly. Go and contact the Holy Land. I hope that 2,000 Saint warriors can enter East Island as soon as possible. The sooner, the better. The more time we have, the more prepared we will be. I'm waiting for the 2 invincible realm experts in Emperor Dong's palace to walk into the trap and meet their doomsday. Molade nodded, turned around and strode away. Contact Yagyu Songchuan. His Majesty suddenly said. Tell him that I promised him. The thing that I promised him back then, the thing that he wanted to do the most, will be done soon. Molade's footsteps paused for a moment before he walked out. His Majesty had promised Yagyu Songchuan many things. But more importantly, there was only one thing that Yagyu Songchuan wanted to do the most. That was to help him get rid of the biggest traitor in Jifeng Sword Training School in the past 100 years at the right time. There was only one biggest traitor in Jifeng Sword Training School in the past 100 years. Tianhai Wuji, the master of Wuji Palace. His Majesty had promised him to kill Beihai Wuji, but only after the final battle in Beihai was over. At that time, the entire Wuji Palace would be His Majesty's own force. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.